Chapter 352. Lu Feng's Qing Ming Tian was really too powerful. The power that erupted was already close to that of a mid-level perfect stage warrior. However, this completely overwhelming power was more terrifying than a high-level perfect stage warrior's attack. After all, this was a piece of heaven. Finally, the power of law was no longer a match for that heaven. With one step, the Crown Prince of Tiandao retreated. Although it was only a small step, he still took a step back. With a gentle wave of his arm, an even more extreme power was born. Lu Feng, as expected, I can't compare to you just by relying on the power of bloodline. The human monarch bloodline is worthy of being the number one bloodline in the world. Lu Feng didn't make a move from beginning to end. He just used the cultivation method of a psyche master to constantly consume his strength. However, because of this, the Crown Prince of Tiandao understood even more how terrifying Lu Feng was. He believed that once Lu Feng really used the power of a warrior, then relying on the strength of a mid-level perfect stage warrior, he, a beginner perfect stage warrior, would definitely not be able to resist. He had already confirmed one thing from the collision just now. That was, Lu Feng had the qualifications to make himself stronger, to allow him to further unleash his trump card. Rhombus power, in his mouth, 4 words softly came out. At this moment, the sound of shackles shattering faintly came out. And it was also at this moment that the Crown Prince of Tiandao's aura changed. The shackles of a beginner warrior had disappeared. What replaced it was the aura of a true mid-level perfect stage warrior. He had already entered the King Path domain. Rhombus power was one of the supreme powers recognized by the universe in the current era. It was a supreme power that was comparable to the power of the heaven-defying bloodline and the great demonic power that appeared in Lu Feng. The reason why the so-called evildoers could fight against the heavens was because they controlled countless heaven-defying supreme powers. With the recovery of Rhombus power, the Crown Prince of Tiandao became even stronger. He looked at Lu Feng, and his expression was strangely cold. His voice slowly rang out. "We are both 6th-level King Path domains. Between you and me, let's fight." The punch swept across the sky and easily shattered everything. The green netherworld sky, which was formed once again in the void, was struck into nothingness. Looking at the current generation, even those ancient existences who had been stuck in the perfect intermediate stage for countless years could not produce such a blow. But in the eyes of these two monsters, it was just an ordinary attack. Lu Feng gave up on the power of a psychic because he knew that in such a confrontation, the power of a psychic would not be of much help at all. His opponent was a true evildoer, one of the top evildoers in the universe. In order to fight against him, Lu Feng had to use his most extreme strength. The endless bloodline had already burned to the point of madness. Lu Feng could feel his entire body trembling. Such a change finally gave him the urge to do everything he could and shatter everything. Kill! In the sky, 2 fists that had penetrated space and time slowly collided. The contact only lasted for an instant. But this moment felt like an eternity. It was as if the calm surface of a mirror had been shattered. Countless cracks had appeared in the void. Invincible, invincible! The two of them were only at the middle stage of perfect stage, but the power that was produced was enough to instantly annihilate any middle stage martial artist who encountered it. After an instant, 2 figures flew out. Countless amounts of bright red blood spread out. Traces of blood slid down in the air. Lu Feng stood still in the distant space and time, his face filled with unprecedented fanaticism. The dark red at the corner of his mouth was so obvious, but Lu Feng seemed to turn a blind eye to it. In his eyes, there was only that figure who was also in an incomparably sorry state but also burning with fighting spirit. Good. Very good. Lu Feng smiled. This was an incomparably crazy and bloodthirsty smile that was terrifying. But in the eyes of the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao, this smile was so comfortable and so happy. Emperor, you are indeed worthy of me fighting with all my strength. In my clan, there is no one in the same realm who can make me fight with all my strength. Although there are those ancient existences to spar with me, how can such sparring partners make me crazy? Since you and I have met here, since the Emperor and the Heavenly King have met here, then let's not waste this opportunity. The battle of the two kings start with us. The figure disappeared again. In the next moment, the crown prince of the heavenly Tao appeared directly beside Lu Feng. This speed was like teleportation, making it impossible for people to feel and grasp. But facing the sudden appearance of the crown prince of the heavenly Tao, Lu Feng did not panic at all. It was that unparalleled killing intent that shook everything, and the final collision that made space and time tremble. Heaven and earth shook. At this moment, the illusory world was once again shaken to the core. Once again, they were sent flying and vomited blood. But before they could recover, they were once again engaged in a battle. Fist after fist, they gave up defense and relied entirely on the power of their bloodline to recover. This was a truly crazy collision, a collision that made everyone tremble. They forgot everything, allowing flesh and blood to fly, allowing themselves to be injured endlessly, but they did not retreat in the slightest. In their eyes, this was no longer an illusory world. This was the stage that belonged to them. As the two greatest monsters in the world, since they had already collided in advance, then the real victor and loser must be decided. This was their monstrous dignity. Power of the Yellow Springs. At the moment when the craziest moment arrived, the crown prince of the heavenly Tao finally released his trump card, his strongest trump card. The second supreme power. This was the supreme power that made him a true peak 7th rank monstrous genius of the monarch realm. It was also a supreme power that surpassed the power of Rhombus, a supreme power of the extreme Tao. The endless world died and shattered. In the void, a wheel seemed to be born. Its birth separated the chaos and shattered the universe. The aura of death spread and began to condense, finally forming the purest power of death. Power of the Yellow Springs, this is my strongest support. Emperor, I am titled Heavenly King, but in the land of the Yellow Springs, my title is King of Hell. I am the only king in the land of the Yellow Springs who has truly controlled the power of the Yellow Springs. The land of the Yellow Springs, that was the universe's death training ground, that was named after the Massacre Abyss. But compared to the Massacre Abyss, the land of the Yellow Springs was more terrifying, more extreme. Entering there was not for any title, nor was it for any glory. Every existence that entered there was for one goal, that was the legendary power that controlled the truth of death, the power of the Yellow Springs. Unfortunately, from the birth of the land of the Yellow Springs until now, there were only a few who could borrow the power of the Yellow Springs, but there was never one who could control it. And now, the crown prince of the heavenly Tao appeared. He was actually the first existence in history to control the power of the Yellow Springs. Shatter. The endless shackles. Frenzied shouts and endless trembling. At this moment, the crown prince of the heavenly Tao had forgotten everything. In his eyes there was only Lu Feng. His fighting spirit was boundless. He wanted to fight, for his glory, for his future path as the Emperor of the Heavenly Tao. He wanted to go crazy. Finally, the ancient world grinding plate was fully manifested. It ground all matter from the chaos, obliterating the chaos, everything, into the only aura of the Yellow Springs. The endless aura of the Yellow Springs poured into the crown prince of the Heavenly Tao's body, causing his power of power to skyrocket without any limit. Lawless, the crown prince of the heavenly Tao was truly lawless at this moment. As a monstrous existence at the peak of the sovereign realm. In addition to his bloodline, he also condensed the power of the rhombus, which was a heaven-defying enhancement. He even had the power of the Yellow Springs, a power that no one had ever controlled. Perhaps if Lu Feng did not appear, he would be unbeatable in this world. But there were no ifs. Lu Feng existed, and compared to him, Lu Feng was even more extreme. Feeling the endless power of the yellow springs that seemed to be able to obliterate everything, Lu Feng's eyes became even more resplendent, the bloodthirsty light almost materializing. All the injuries on his body had completely disappeared under the boiling of his bloodline. At this moment, Lu Feng had already returned to his peak state. Finally, it shattered. 7th level, peak of the sovereign realm. Emperor, I have already reached the peak of my life's greatest blessing. What about you? Let me see what your 7th level of fighting strength is. The power of the yellow springs turned into a sparkling battle robe, adorning the crown prince of the heavenly Tao. At this moment, his body turned into an incomparably tall and sturdy existence. Now that the crown prince of the heavenly Tao had shattered the 7th level, he had truly entered the peak of the sovereign realm. The current him, his fighting strength could no longer be described as heaven-defying. Even if a true high-level perfect phase warrior appeared in front of him, he would be easily suppressed and completely crushed by him. Lu Feng's blood was already burning, and Lu Feng's heart was incomparably violent. Since his debut, this was the craziest battle he had ever fought, and the most thorough burning of his blood. Lu Feng could no longer suppress the terrifying fighting spirit. He could no longer suppress the crazy battle in his heart. The power of the yellow springs. This is the power of the yellow springs? Good. Good. Very good. 7th level, shatter for me. Great demonic true body. The golden essence appeared and spread around Lu Feng's body. At this moment, the void seemed to reflect the ancient long river of time and space, and from the long river, a supreme existence slowly walked out. His body was surrounded by the essence of demonic transformation that surpassed everything. It was the most thorough power of the great demonic true body. Finally, the incarnation stopped behind Lu Feng. At this moment, the phantom of the human king began to fade, and finally disappeared completely. Similarly, the terrifying existence of the great demonic true body also slowly faded, and finally disappeared. However, the moment the two phantoms completely disappeared, a brand new existence appeared. Gently standing there, it seemed to be the intertwining of time and space. His face was blurred and was endlessly hidden. His entire body was surrounded by an extremely noble aura. It was the power of an emperor that made everything submit. The golden color and the color of the golden emperor intertwined, rendering a kind of demonic essence, a kind of king's glory and glory. At this moment, Lu Feng slightly opened his arms. He seemed to have become one with the demonic existence. He was the demonic emperor. With a wave of his hand, heaven and earth shook, the cycle of reincarnation fell, and time died. The current battlefield was no longer a battle of bloodlines, it was no longer an ordinary battlefield. Here, there was no collision of the Divine King's bloodlines. Here, there was no collision of the Divine King's phantoms. In the past, the ancient illusion behind the crown prince of the heavenly Tao, Wang Qingyun, had disappeared. The 7 supreme beings of the universe, the peerless Divine King's projection, were completely shattered by the yellow springs plate that suddenly appeared, crushed into the purest power. At this moment, he was the projection of the yellow springs plate, and he was the definition of the power of the yellow springs. Chapter 353. Bit by bit, it stirred up the yellow springs and caused the heavens and earth to rise and fall. The power of the yellow springs was like Lu Feng's power of the great demon. It was enough to allow any divine king's bloodline to advance to the 7th rank, allowing them to enter the peak of the monarch realm. At this moment, every movement of the Tiandao crown prince caused the yellow springs plate to tremble, producing endless power that could affect the operation of time and space. Such power was enough to make any high-level perfect stage martial artist despair, unable to produce any will to resist. But to Lu Fenglai this was nothing. Because he was now the great demon. In the universe, in the eternal spacetime, the only great demon that had existed since time immemorial and was eternally indestructible. The true essence of the great demon that entangled everything, crossed the barriers of time and space, and sent the strongest true essence from a distant era, the ultimate power. Lu Feng was the incarnation of the great demon. His power of power shook the cycle of reincarnation and crushed the yellow springs. The illusory world was thoroughly disturbed by the power of the two people's appearance. Countless regions began to shatter, thick magma appeared, and the earth cracked. Although the illusory world was called illusory, it was actually a real world. This was a brand new world formed when the great demons of the heavenly Tao race entered the deepest burial grounds of the universe and collected the worlds of the super powerhouses that had yet to completely perish. Therefore, the illusory world was actually a real world. And at this moment the illusory world, this incomparably huge illusory world, had been beaten to a pulp by the extreme collision of the two people. It was almost completely shattered. But the Tiandao Crown Prince didn't seem to see any of this. An illusory world was a true life-bearing planet, and the value of an illusory world was even higher. In terms of value, his illusory world was probably more precious than any 8th-grade artifact. This was something that couldn't be measured by value. But at this moment, the Tiandao Crown Prince didn't care. Because in his eyes, not to mention a single illusory world, even 10 or 100 of them added together couldn't compare to this battle. This battle would become the most glorious battle of this generation. Because the start of this battle meant that all the kings had descended, and the road to emperor had opened. Is this the last thing you can rely on? Great demon! Is this the legendary great magic power? The Crown Prince of the Heavens Law became even crazier. He knew about Lu Feng's great devil power. In the Massacre Abyss, you single-handedly suppressed 5 peak 5th-order emperors. What you relied on in the end was the power of the great devil, right? Let me have a look this time. Will your great devil power reign supreme throughout the ages, or will my yellow spring power reign supreme throughout the ages? Crown Prince Tiandao didn't use any weapons in this clash. They all knew that only a collision that didn't rely on anything was a true collision. With a light shake, the yellow springs plate surged. Every time it spun, it crushed a piece of the void. Behind Lu Feng, the great demon phantom began to roar, as if it had stirred up the most basic demonic craziness. Lu Feng was just as crazy. Just like that, he unleashed a terrifying attack towards that distant place. The earth instantly turned into nothingness, causing this pure natural world to be destroyed to the point of near nothingness. Although this casual attack was at the level of a high-level perfect stage martial artist, this power was enough to easily kill any high-level perfect stage martial artist. This was the terror of a monstrous genius with King Dao domain. This was the extreme of a peak monstrous genius with King Dao domain. A peak monstrous genius with King Dao domain, as long as they didn't die, they were destined to reach the supreme stage. Such an existence might not even be born once in 1,000 years in the entire universe. But now there were 2 of them. Therefore, the 2 of them attached great importance to this clash of kings. The yellow springs plate surged, and the power of the yellow springs burst forth. Through the void collision of the great demon slaughter that Lu Feng unleashed, endless vibrations spread out, affecting a piece of heaven and earth. In the next moment the 2 figures didn't disappear. Because at this moment they were the phantoms behind them. Although they were still independent individuals, their intrinsic power was already connected with the phantoms. Every movement was the collision of the ancient great demon and the yellow springs plate. They had already been annihilated, sinking into the ancient era, but their power had been passed down eternally. In this era, they were going to start the final fated collision. Kill. Destroy. A shocking roar shook space and time. The yellow springs plate shook endlessly from the void, and it actually relied on its huge body to crush down. This was an incomparably terrifying scene, making people tremble. The size of the Yellow Springs plate far exceeded the existence of 10,000 meters. Above its surroundings, there was endless power of the Yellow Springs. Even a trace of it was enough to kill a perfect stage martial artist. When such a Yellow Springs plate fell from the sky, the power of power was enough to shatter a world. Lu Feng didn't retreat, but he became even crazier. His blood had already boiled to the peak. The blood of gold and imperial gold merged into his bone marrow and soul. It made him forget everything. In his eyes, there was only the crown prince of heavenly Tao, only Wang Qingyun, only this heavenly king that he recognized as his lifelong rival. Unparalleled King Tao. Unparalleled King Tao. Everyone stepped on the King Tao. It didn't matter if you were a heavenly king or a killer king, you were still titled kings. And I, Lu Feng, am an emperor among kings. I am in charge of everything, I look down on billions of years, I look down on all ages. In the end, all of you are just my subjects. Therefore, my King Tao is the true unparalleled King Tao. The great demon went crazy. At this moment, the great demon was Lu Feng, and Lu Feng was an existence that had transformed into the great demon. The two went completely berserk at the same time. Facing the Yellow Springs plate that was more than 10 times bigger than him, the great demon Lu Feng didn't have the slightest fear. What he chose was to use the most extreme violence to crush everything in front of him. His arms held up the sky, propping up an era. Lu Feng, or perhaps the great demon, used the most terrifying and domineering power to completely stop the Yellow Springs plate in midair. At the moment of collision, everything within 100,000 miles of the illusory world completely disappeared. The destructive range of this power was even wider than a third-grade life planet. The two of them were only peak evolution stage martial artists, but when they entered the peak 7th-step King Tao domain and used all their trump cards, they could destroy a third-grade life planet with a single collision. Such a scene left Lulu, who was in the middle of protection, shocked and at a loss. She knew that the heavenly Tao Crown Prince was strong, extremely strong. In the entire heavenly Tao race, he was publicly recognized as the #1 person of the younger generation. In the past, Lulu had also seen a heavenly Tao race's royal bloodline challenge the heavenly Tao Crown Prince, but the result was incomparably shocking. With just a single strike, the heavenly Tao Crown Prince won. However, the shock at that time couldn't be compared to now. The ultimate collision that was like the end of the world. In the sky, Lu Feng's body was trembling, and the great demon's body was also trembling. Countless drops of blood were left behind, and a golden color filled the void, adorning the starry sky. It was brilliant and dazzling. However, such a beautiful illusion was formed from the accumulation of countless drops of blood. That golden purity was all Lu Feng's blood. The power of the great demon was not inferior to the power of the Yellow Springs. In fact, it was even stronger. The human king bloodline was stronger than the 7 caltrops divine king bloodline. It was completely overwhelming. But in the end, Lu Feng still retreated, and even walked to the edge of being completely crushed. The reason for all of this was because at the last moment, the heavenly Tao Crown Prince used an even stronger taboo strength. Emperor, my ultimate taboo strength is my martial Tao incarnation. Although because of my level, my martial Tao incarnation has already surpassed your imagination, in order to fight with all my strength, I still used it in the end. The pressure was even more terrifying. Lu Feng's body seemed like it was about to collapse. The great demon's phantom began to tremble, and countless cracks appeared around it. This was a killing blow. This was a moment of absolute crisis. But in this instant, Lu Feng didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. His eyes were still filled with the craziest light. His blood was still burning with the utmost intensity. Finally, at the last moment, a huge haze appeared in the sky. That was a special feeling without any form, but it really existed. It seemed to be a piece of sky. Emperor, my martial Tao incarnation is the 10th grade King Tao incarnation, Yellow Springs Heaven. 10th grade King Tao incarnation. The heavenly Tao Crown Prince actually had a 10th grade martial Tao incarnation. In the legends, as long as an existence with a 10th grade martial Tao incarnation didn't die midway, then it would be a supreme being that would ascend to the divine king's realm. King Tao incarnation, innately awakened to the 2nd grade, and the current perfect stage King Tao incarnation could even raise the martial Tao incarnation to the 7th grade. Obviously, the heavenly Tao Crown Prince was such an existence. He had the most terrifying talent since ancient times, and the support of the entire heavenly Tao race's resources. His martial Tao incarnation, when he became a perfect stage martial artist, had already evolved and become a true 7th grade martial Tao incarnation. Moreover, the heavenly Tao Crown Prince, Wang Qingyun, not only had this terrifying 10th grade martial Tao incarnation, but he also had the power of Yellow Springs, the power of Wu Ling, and the bloodline inheritance of the 7th divine king. No wonder he vowed to attack the only Emperor Tao domain of this era, and compete with Lu Feng for the #1 position in the world. The heavenly Tao Crown Prince indeed had such qualifications. Yellow Springs Heaven, that was the legendary supreme heaven that was born in the immortal and devil era. Its existence was reincarnation. Many immortals and devils would return to Yellow Springs Heaven after they died, and obtain a different kind of new life there. Therefore, the Yellow Springs Heaven was also known as the Reincarnation Heaven. The heavenly Tao Crown Prince had condensed the power of the Yellow Springs Heaven. He was the only existence in the current era who had obtained the power of the Yellow Springs. He could even summon the Yellow Springs Plate, the true body of the Yellow Springs. It could be said that when these three powers were completely superimposed, the heavenly Tao Crown Prince might not be able to directly enter the 8th grade King Tao domain, but in the 7th grade King Tao domain, he was already the most terrifying existence. Chapter 354. At this moment, Lu Feng was completely suppressed. He did not have the slightest power to resist. Although this state had not reached the limit of great success, it was already Lu Feng's peak strength. Since his debut, Lu Feng had experienced life and death situations. However, this was the first time he was suppressed to such a miserable state by a martial artist of the same level. Madness, complete madness. After being suppressed to the extreme, Lu Feng did not remain silent. Instead, he used the craziest action to completely counterattack. I am Emperor Lu Feng. Then, how can I submit? You have an incarnation. I, Lu Feng, do not have one too. Lu Feng roared. He displayed his craziness and revealed his sharpness. He could not retreat. He would not retreat. He was Emperor Lu Feng. No matter who he faced, he had to use his strongest power to suppress them. How could his glory and identity allow him to retreat in defeat? Therefore, one of Lu Feng's hidden secrets, his martial art incarnation, appeared, connecting the origin and the end, traversing history and the present world. It allowed the other side to be outlined and life to be carved. It appeared just like this. It did not have the will to destroy everything and quietly floated in the air. However, its existence was like a totem worshipped by billions of races in the universe. It was a belief that even immortals, demons, and gods had to be devout. All the principles intertwined, all the concerns of fate, all the entanglement of karma. This was connecting heaven Futu. This was Lu Feng's martial art incarnation, connecting heaven Futu. Connecting heaven Futu appeared in the world. Rank 6 martial art incarnation. How is this possible? Shock, complete shock. The crown prince of Tian Dao's face was filled with endless shock. He could feel Lu Feng's martial art incarnation, the power of connecting heaven Futu when it was born. That was rank 6. It was definitely a rank 6 martial art incarnation. But why was it rank 6? This was not right. This was not right at all. You are only a peak evolution stage martial artist. Even if you have a king incarnation like me, the strongest should only be rank 5. But how can you be rank 6? Why? Why? Yellow Springs heaven shook. The power of Yellow Springs plate became even more terrifying. The endless chaotic void was once again completely crushed and turned into the most primitive power of Yellow Springs. All of it was poured into the Crown Prince of Tiandao's body. At this moment, under the craziness, he was infinitely terrifying. He threw out a punch. Heaven and earth shatter. Lu Feng's body, which was holding the Yellow Springs plate, was almost torn into pieces at this moment. Golden light and blood filled his mouth, making the void even more beautiful. However, the great demon body, which should have been crushed by the Yellow Springs plate, did not fall. In fact, it was even more terrifying and powerful. What kind of martial Tao incarnation is that? How could it be so terrifying? The heavenly Tao Crown Prince watched as the heavenly stupa appeared, as it rose to power, as it smashed the heavens with a single strike. If the all heavens were completely shattered, then netherworld sky would also be completely pierced through. Dark red blood also flowed out of his mouth. The madness in his eyes became even more extreme. The Crown Prince of Tiandao could not imagine that Lu Feng would have such a shocking martial art incarnation. His martial art incarnation was a rank 10 king incarnation. It was an existence that could not be defeated in the same level. But when faced with Lu Feng's martial art incarnation, which was obviously a rank lower, his Yellow Springs heaven seemed to have lost all its power. It was actually completely destroyed. How could the Crown Prince of Tiandao accept such a scene? It's not over yet. It's not over yet. Even if heaven-piercing Fudu appeared, Lu Feng could only resist the most terrifying suppression of the Yellow Springs plate. Lu Feng was still at an absolute disadvantage. Emperor, I want to win this battle. I must win. The Yellow Springs plate retracted. All of the power of Yellow Springs was retracted. In the end, it all returned to the Crown Prince of Tiandao. At this moment, he did not have any injuries. He stood quietly in the sky, allowing the endless prosperity to appear, quietly rendering his greatness and glory. Beside him was an illusory world that had been shattered beyond recognition. It was a world where one could not tell that this was a world. Lu Feng took a few deep breaths. His whole body was in tatters. Blood flowed out of his body. Traces of gold flowed out of the corner of his mouth. Everything made Lu Feng look exceptionally miserable. But Lu Feng's eyes were still bloodthirsty. His fighting spirit was high. Stretching out his arm, he gently wiped away the golden blood flowing out of the corner of his mouth. Lu Feng took a deep breath and slowly stood up. The great demon returned. The terrifying great demon that could roar the heavens and crush the world quietly returned behind Lu Feng. It was as if it was setting off Lu Feng's countless and unparalleled power. Heavenly King, in a battle of the same level, no one has ever forced me to this extent. Even if they are stronger than me, no one has ever caused me to suffer such great injuries in such a fair battle. You are the first and the only one. The madness and bloodthirst in Lu Feng's eyes calmed down a little. Crown Prince Tiandao knew that this did not mean that Lu Feng was giving up. Instead, he was going to enter the greatest degree of madness. Crown Prince Tiandao smiled. Although he had a calm will, the feeling of madness still lingered, filling him with an incomparably strange and twisted expression. The battle strength of a peak rank 7 Emperor Dao domain. This is the strongest battle strength limit in the universe, since the primordial immortal devil era until now. However, all living beings know that above this rank 7, there is an even more ancient domain. That is the rank 8 Emperor Dao domain. Legend has it that the rank 8 Emperor Dao domain is a domain that only young overlords can enter. Only after going through countless battles, clashing with countless young paragons, and finally suppressing all opponents, can one truly step into the rank 8 Emperor Dao domain. Only then can one break the taboo and enter the forbidden battle strength mythical domain. In every era, as long as there are more than 5 peak rank 7 Monarch Dao domain experts, then a true young Overlord will be born, and another Overlord will appear in that era. His voice was unusually low, carrying with it an endless mystery and an endless strange aura. Crown Prince Tiandao's words seemed to bring Lu Feng into a strange environment. In this era, legend has it that your Lu family's godslayer Lu Tao, known as the universe's #1 talent in the past 500 years, is rank 7. And you, Emperor Lu Feng, are also rank 7. I, Crown Prince Tiandao, am. Other than the three of us, the underworld race also once gave birth to an existence that surpassed the extreme Dao. He should also be rank 7 battle strength. I already know that there are 4 of us, and I believe that it's impossible that these peak overlords of the universe don't know about the arrival of such a golden era. They must have a backup plan. Indra, the Bayan Emperor race's 2 great races, the Blood race and the Sky Demon race, are ancient peak races like our Tiandao race. The War God race and the Sky race also have a long history. How could they let such an opportunity slip by? Moreover, my ancestor once said that in this era, many legendary existences will awaken one after another. They have fallen for countless eras just to wait for an opportunity to become overlords. Therefore, this era will truly be an era of incomparable chaos. Emperor, I'm sure that you have rank 7 battle strength, but I can feel that you're still suppressing your battle strength. You still have more limits that you haven't used. The battle between you and me will be the beginning of the most brilliant era in history. This kind of glory is incomparable to anything else. Therefore, Emperor, I hope that you won't hold back. In this battle, regardless of victory or defeat, let us fight our way through with our greatest strength. The Crown Prince of the Tiandao race even roared at the last moment. Like Lu Feng, he felt his blood burning crazily. At this moment, although he was suppressing his strength, he had already entered an unprecedented state. This was the most extreme state that made him tremble endlessly, made his blood boil, and made him completely crazy and arrogant. Therefore, he wanted to fight. He wanted to fight in the most thorough, unrestrained, and powerful way. He wasn't afraid that Lu Feng was too strong. He was only afraid that Lu Feng wasn't strong enough. He was only afraid that Lu Feng wouldn't let him unleash his true limits. He closed his eyes slightly. At this moment, Lu Feng seemed to have entered the most wonderful state. Indeed, he hadn't entered the peak of his life, although he had now entered the peak of rank 7 Monarch realm. But there was still a gap between this and his peak. Although his peak was also a high-level perfect stage martialist, his battle strength was comparable to a peak perfect stage martialist. However, Lu Feng didn't directly unleash his strongest battle strength. This was because ever since he had condensed his martial path embodiment, sky-piercing Fudu, to rank 6, he really hadn't used his full strength. Back when he had met Jiahuo, Lu Feng had also reached his peak state and even summoned the Great Emperor phenomenon. However, at that time, Lu Feng hadn't really made a move. Perhaps he had made a move, but it wasn't the maximum output at all. Lu Feng himself also understood that once his battle strength was unleashed to its limit, he really wouldn't be able to control himself. Lu Feng didn't know what kind of situation he would be in at that time. Lu Feng wasn't willing to use this kind of unknown power because he was the emperor. What he wanted was to control everything. However, if he didn't unleash it now, it was obviously impossible. His opponent was a heavenly king. In the current world, the most powerful monstrous genius that had appeared so far was comparable to his father, Lu Tao, who killed gods. They were both standing in the peak of rank 7 Monarch realm. Without his limit, He couldn't be compared to the Tiandao Crown Prince, who had unleashed his rank 7 martial path embodiment and possessed the power of the Yellow Springs and the power of no caltrops. Lu Feng didn't want to lose. He couldn't lose. Therefore, in the end, he still decided. Chapter 355. Since you want me to unleash my most extreme power, then, let's fight. His eyes slowly opened. It was also at this moment that a true phenomenon of the galaxy trembling appeared in the void. In a trance, the great demon behind Lu Feng completely disappeared. In its place, endless immortal music played. It was the worship of ancient immortals and demons, the praise of thousands of gods. Space-time appeared, reincarnation appeared, fate appeared, karma appeared. Everything that existed, didn't exist, could be sensed, and couldn't be sensed all appeared. When they were born, the unknown and mysterious Nirvana Permitha broke through all the shackles and appeared beside Lu Feng. The Tiandao Crown Prince stared blankly at the scene before him, unable to breathe. He was thoroughly shocked. The phenomenon that appeared here was simply indescribable. Since ancient times, he had read a lot of books, but he had never heard of such a phenomenon. No wonder your title is Imperial Sovereign. You are an emperor. So this is the reason. The worship of immortals and demons, the devotion of gods, even space-time and fate had to worship him. This was a true emperor. He was the strongest emperor that made everything submit, tremble, and revere. Gradually, Lu Feng's figure seemed to turn into nothingness. At this moment, Lu Feng had completely disappeared. It was as if he had transformed into an incarnation of himself, an incarnation of a heaven-shaking phenomenon. The crown of the emperor's glory, the robe of endless majesty, the cries of azure dragons, immortal phoenixes, and the cheers of ancient divine beasts. All the phenomena were born. All existences went crazy for the birth of the phenomenon and prostrated themselves in worship. That is, the Tiandao Crown Prince was indescribably shocked. Because at this moment, Lu Feng had already reached an unimaginable level. His strength couldn't be described with words. At the final moment, the Babel Stupa descended. Under the illumination of the most mysterious and mighty martial way incarnation since ancient times, Lu Feng, who had transformed into a supreme emperor, finally opened his eyes. This is my ultimate strength. This is the limit of the strength that I have fused with everything. I call it, the great emperor's incarnation, the strongest since ancient times, the incarnation of the great emperor. The incarnation of the great emperor. After muttering a few words, the heavenly Tao Crown Prince's eyes shone with a bloodthirsty light that could shake everything. His arm trembled slightly. In the yellow spring heaven behind him, the enormous yellow spring disk was shaking continuously, as if it was experiencing an illusion of endless chaos. The strongest power inherited from the ancient era, I possess the bloodline power of the 7 divine kings, I possess the strongest true essence of the Wu Ling lineage, and I have also obtained the strongest support of the Yellow Springs, which has never been seen before. I, Wang Qingyun, am destined to be the strongest in this era. Your emperor is not a match for my heavenly king. The crown prince of the heavenly Tao, who had temporarily lost his rationality due to shock, went completely crazy once again. The power of the Yellow Springs was fully unleashed, giving off a feeling of annihilation. Lulu had temporarily forgotten everything as she watched the two peerless geniuses clash. There was an indescribable dazzling radiance in her eyes. Both of them were her older cousins, and were among the greatest evildoers in the world. In other eras, any one of them would definitely be an unparalleled king of that era. Both of them were destined to enter the realm of the Divine King. Although both of them were at the peak evolution stage of the power of power, the leakage of their aura was enough to easily obliterate any upheaval transformation stage martial artist. Even a perfect stage martial artist was just a slightly stronger ant in front of the two of them. These two people had really reached the limit of evolution stage martial artists, and had truly become lawless people who ignored the rules. Now they had clashed. In this incomparably brilliant golden era, the two peerless geniuses had clashed for the first time. Being able to witness the start of the chaotic battle of the kings might be a kind of glory. Lulu quietly looked at the two peerless geniuses who were slowly making their move. My Heavenly Tao clan is known as the Heavenly Tao, a clan bestowed by the heavens. Our secret techniques are all bestowed by the heavens. Emperor, let me see if the great Heavenly Tao secret technique, condensed by our Heavenly Tao clan's divine king or the human king scripture created by your Lu family's human king is crazy. Great Heavenly Tao secret technique. The Heavenly Tao clan's peerless secret technique. The only supreme being technique in the entire Heavenly Tao clan, and also the most powerful peerless secret technique. According to the legends, the great Heavenly Tao secret technique was a supreme technique created by many divine kings' joint comprehension. This technique didn't have any end point, and it was constantly in a state of constant evolution. Once a peerless expert comprehended it, it would evolve without limit, and even become a peerless technique that surpassed the Supreme Being technique and the Three Kings scripture. Lu Feng took a deep breath, and a trace of clarity appeared in his crazy eyes. He had long heard of the great Heavenly Tao secret technique. It was a supreme technique that could be compared to the human king's scripture in the entire universe. However, the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince had already studied the great Heavenly Tao secret technique for a long time. However, Lu Feng hadn't studied any of the techniques in the human king's scripture. It could be said that he was already standing at an absolute disadvantage. However, Lu Feng didn't care about this at all. Without the human king's scripture, could it be that he wasn't Emperor Lu Feng? Although his technique couldn't be compared to those true disciples of aristocratic families, he, Lu Feng, had never backed down because of this. Human king's scripture, if I don't have it, then so be it. This time, it was Lu Feng's turn to attack. This was the first time Lu Feng had taken the initiative to attack since the start of the battle. Unparalleled power was mobilized, and the strongest will started to bloom. The current Lu Feng was already the strongest he had ever been in this lifetime. The eternal glory of the Emperor, advancing courageously, breaking through the cycle of reincarnation, standing at the peak of all eternity. This was Lu Feng, the Emperor Lu Feng who was below the Emperor. A single punch triggered the endless immortal and demon avatars. In the sky, when the Emperor raged, corpses fell from heaven and earth. Endless immortal and demon avatars went crazy, igniting the peak power. Billions of deities trembled, prostrating and praying devoutly. Endless immortal and divine beasts roared in the sky, causing the color of time and space to change. This was the craziest scene. With Lu Feng's turbulence, even the vague power of laws started a complete turmoil, a kind of endless madness. A single punch, this was a casual punch, but this punch unleashed a forbidden power that caused everyone to tremble in fear. A casual punch, but it was equivalent to the most powerful slaughter of those peak perfect stage martial artists. Such an attack seemed to have already stepped into the forbidden territory. Even more shock appeared in his eyes. Crown Prince Tiandao looked at Lu Feng, who seemed to have become one with the Emperor's incarnation, in disbelief, and was momentarily absent-minded. This is the power of the forbidden. You have already begun to come into contact with the power of the forbidden domain. Although Lu Feng's strength realm hadn't entered the 8th stage of the Emperor's realm, Crown Prince Tiandao also understood that without countless bloodshed and killing, without several Emperor's realm collapsing battles, it was impossible to enter that domain. However, just because he couldn't enter it didn't mean he couldn't approach it. Being able to approach the forbidden domain meant that Lu Feng's strength and realm were already at the peak of the Emperor's realm. He was already standing at the forefront of all 7th stage peak Emperor's realm freaks. Could it be that you have also collided with peak Emperor's realm existences before? Only those who had fought peak Emperor's realm freaks could raise their strength to such a level. However, before this, he hadn't felt a collision between peak Emperor's realm geniuses at all. They were all peak King Dao geniuses. Once they collided, even space and time would react. Although their strength hadn't reached the large success stage, because they were existences at the same cultivation level, they could completely sense the fluctuations coming from the collision. However, Crown Prince Tiandao was sure that before he and Lu Feng met, there was absolutely no Emperor's realm battle born. But why was Lu Feng able to walk in front of him, able to come into contact with the existence of the forbidden domain? This was impossible, absolutely impossible. While he was in a daze, a powerful attack had already arrived. Although it was just a casual wave from Lu Feng, this attack had already touched upon the existence of the forbidden domain. In terms of power, it was simply lawless and terrifying. Vaguely, the entire void was about to be completely shattered by this attack. Heaven and earth were about to be completely shaken and shattered. Crown Prince Tiandao was unwilling, even if Lu Feng had touched upon the existence of the forbidden domain. However, Lu Feng himself was only a peak upheaval transformation stage cultivator. As for him, he was at the perfect stage. Although he suppressed his strength, his level was far above Lu Feng's. How could he lose such a battle? How could he tolerate failure? Great Heavenly Path Secret Technique, Still Flow Heaven Encompassing Heaven. Still Flow Heaven Encompassing Heaven. One of the supreme secret techniques of the Great Heavenly Path Secret Technique. Crown Prince Tiandao, who understood everything, knew that if this continued, he would definitely be completely suppressed. Therefore, he directly used the supreme technique of the Great Heavenly Path Secret Technique. The power of the Yellow Springs surged, and the Yellow Springs heaven began to shake endlessly, providing an unparalleled power. Within the Crown Prince Tiandao's body, the seven divine kings' rhombus power, which had transcended everything, also began to shake. Countless powers were frantically drawn by him, forming the appearance of an ancient heaven. The Great Heavenly Path Secret Technique was a cultivation technique that was infinitely close to the Heavenly Path. It was a supreme technique that only the Heavenly Path race could use. And this still flow heaven encompassing heaven was like the green netherworld sky, transforming into a supreme heaven. The difference was that the green netherworld sky relied on the most powerful violence, using the power of the entire heaven to forcefully crush and obliterate the opponent. As for this still flow heaven encompassing heaven, it relied on endless profound mysteries to bind the opponent and completely crush them. In terms of profound mysteries, the two were simply not on the same level. If I could transform into the heaven of the green netherworld sky, then I could completely suppress this still flow heaven encompassing heaven with violence. Unfortunately, the current me is still not enough. The level of still flow heaven encompassing heaven was too high, and it was considered a divine technique. It was even a supreme divine technique, a supreme power condensed by the ancient divine king of the Heavenly Path race. As for the green netherworld sky, unless one reached the pinnacle of the Heavenly Path realm, there was no way one could suppress this divine king's technique. However, it's a pity that this still flow heaven encompassing heaven is ultimately a supreme divine technique. The current you is still unable to unleash its true power. Lu Feng's fist pressed forward with indomitable will, killing millions of people. Although he was facing a supreme divine technique, his opponent was far from reaching the realm of greater mastery. Back when he was facing the celestial wolf race's Abyss Wolf, he had relied on himself as the Emperor to completely suppress Abyss Wolf's supreme divine technique. Now that he was even stronger and more unimaginable, how could he fail? Therefore, Lu Feng had suppressed it. Still flow heaven encompassing heaven covered the sense of existence of everything. Compared to the heaven born from the green netherworld sky, it was countless times larger, more profound and more majestic. However, Facing such a heaven, Lu Feng only had one expression, and that was madness. Break, break, break. Break for me. The great emperor's projection had completely become Lu Feng. At this moment, Lu Feng was the incarnation of the great emperor. He was the eternal great emperor who reigned supreme in the entire universe and billions of time and space. The cover of still flow heaven encompassing heaven-bound everything. However, Lu Feng's violence was about to shatter everything. The taboo power kept bursting out. Although it was only at the level of a peak perfect stage martial artist, because of the taboo aura, it had already entered another level. Lu Feng's fist didn't hit anyone because what he hit was the heaven. It was the entire still flow heaven encompassing heaven. The boundless turbulence enveloped Lulu in a protective power. Even so, she still felt this indescribable power. Before this, she simply couldn't believe that an evolutionary stage martial artist could achieve such a degree of destruction. This was simply an indescribable fear, an indescribable horror. The collision of the fists, the turbulence of heaven and earth, the nothingness of time, and the trembling of time and space. Lu Feng was ruthless, and the bloodthirsty power in his eyes had already filled all of his eyes. He had already forgotten everything. His madness had driven the eternal great emperor, turning this invincible great emperor into a crazy killing emperor. Finally, with the feeling of heaven and earth shattering and trembling, still flow heaven encompassing heaven, one of the most powerful supreme divine techniques in the great heavenly path secret technique, completely collapsed. Chapter 356. The great emperor raised the sky and annihilated the cycle of reincarnation. Lu Feng stood quietly under the shattered sky. His eyes were filled with madness. His blood congealed and he became divinity. The pinnacle of life. Not enough, still not enough. He softly spat out 5 words from his mouth. At this moment, Lu Feng was a bloodthirsty emperor. Vaguely, he felt that he had entered a wonderful realm. It was a special realm that he entered when he first condensed the incarnation of the great emperor in the Mu clan. In this realm, he was invincible. Can you still be strong? I need you to be strong. I want to surpass him. In this era, I want to be the eternal emperor. I want to reign supreme in the galaxy. I want to become the true #1 great emperor. So, go crazy for me. Let me unleash my strongest combat strength. Lu Feng's voice seemed to be mocking him. It made the crown prince of Heavenly Tao's face turn gloomy. He had been hiding for so many years. In the Heavenly Tao race, no one knew about his greatness and unparalleled power except for the most ancient existences. However, this did not mean that he would keep a low profile forever. From the moment he clashed with Lu Feng, he had already recovered. He had truly walked out of his hidden identity and was about to become the true crown prince of Heavenly Tao. However, just as he was about to achieve glory, he was actually disregarded by Lu Feng in such a manner that was even more excessive than ridicule. He was truly unable to endure it. However, in the face of such a state, such a taboo and almost invincible Lu Feng, what could he do even if he felt indignant? Although this wasn't his strongest power, in front of Lu Feng, he didn't even have the leeway to fight back and was directly smashed to pieces. Moreover, this was only a casual attack from Lu Feng. It was not the true Mortal King scripture that he unleashed after unleashing the true Mortal King scripture. The Crown Prince of Heavenly Tao understood that if he used a more powerful power than the great Heavenly Tao secret art, he would at most be on par with Lu Feng. If Lu Feng really used some kind of powerful cultivation method, the legendary #1 cultivation method in the world, the Human King scripture, then he would have no hope at all. He couldn't fight. How could he fight? He had never felt so helpless before. As a 7th-rank peak monstrous genius, he already stood at the peak of all monstrous geniuses. Endless time and space, countless epochs. Even when he was young, the Overlord of the First War of the Kings was nothing more than this. However, at this moment, he actually felt so helpless. He was actually being ridiculed by an existence whose strength was far lower than his. This was a great desolation, a sorrow that only belonged to supreme kings. Looking at the unparalleled figure surging in the endless yellow springs, and feeling his helplessness and madness, Lu Feng's cold eyes flashed with a strange expression. That was madness, a madness that carried determination and strangeness. I know that if it was your true strength, it would be easy for you to suppress me. Now that you've entered the peak of rank 7 King Dao domain, if you release your true strength, you can even suppress a peak demigod. But in order to have a fair fight with me, you sealed your strength. Now I've already entered my own peak. I was no longer hiding anything. Then what about you? You can also release your strength now. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao was slightly stunned. He looked at Lu Feng in disbelief. Who was he? He was the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao. He was the existence that stood at the peak of all monstrous geniuses since ancient times. Even though he had been suppressed by Lu Feng to such an extent, Lu Feng was still able to suppress him. This didn't diminish his greatness. Now, he was suppressed by Lu Feng. However, once he recovered his peak combat strength, Lu Feng would be nothing to him. Below his peak, he could even fight a demigod who had entered the 4th rank. He would even dare to fight. Although Lu Feng had already touched the forbidden territory, it was absolutely impossible for him to enter it. Therefore, Lu Feng's strength was at most comparable to a peak perfect stage martial artist. The difference between a peak perfect stage martial artist and a 4th rank demigod was huge. Therefore, once he regained his true strength, Lu Feng would be on the verge of defeat. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao knew this point. He believed that Lu Feng also understood it. But why did he still say such words? Puzzled, completely puzzled. Shocked, completely shocked. Lu Feng sighed softly. The madness and bloodthirst in his eyes calmed down slightly. If the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao understood it, he naturally understood it too. Once the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao really recovered his peak strength and entered the 7th rank peak sovereign realm as a perfect stage martial artist, he wouldn't be his opponent. However, Lu Feng still made such a choice. Because he wanted to have a crazy battle. He wanted to use this battle to polish his essence, energy, and spirit to the peak realm. Only in this way would he be able to complete his cultivation. Only then would he be able to attempt to enter the 3rd realm of the Great Devil True Body, the Purple Gold Great Devil Realm. For this, even if he went crazy, what could he do? Moreover, Lu Feng also knew that he couldn't die. Because he still had 3 pieces of guardian crystals. This was enough to ensure that he would be safe and sound this time. To Lu Feng, the value of a piece of guardian crystal, especially in this place, was far less than what he needed to break through. Therefore, Lu Feng wanted to give it a try and directly use his limit. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao looked at Lu Feng. He could feel that Lu Feng wasn't joking. He also wasn't deliberately mocking him. He really wanted to challenge himself when he was at his peak. Emperor, you are very strong. I admit that I am not your opponent in the same realm. Although the battle just now didn't end, the real result was that he lost. After all, his cultivation level was 2 levels higher than Lu Feng's. Although he compressed his strength, his control over his strength wouldn't be compressed. In this aspect, he had a huge advantage. Moreover, in order to be able to kill with the strongest force, he used his martial Dao incarnation, Yellow Springs Heaven. A rank 7 martial Dao incarnation, this advantage couldn't even be described as huge. After all, he was a perfect stage martial artist and had a king-grade martial Dao incarnation. As for Lu Feng, even if he also had a king-grade martial Dao incarnation, his highest was only rank 5. There was a huge difference between rank 7 and rank 5. But even so, He had two advantages that were far superior to Lu Feng, but he still fought like this. Therefore, he had been defeated. He had been utterly defeated. He looked at Lu Feng quietly. The yellow springs plate's terrifying form was still flickering. The endless majestic power of the yellow springs was still there. But at this moment, he no longer had the previous madness and the feeling of shock. In his eyes there was a kind of hesitation, because at this moment he was also hesitating. After all, he was the strongest monster in the world. If he had to rely on his own strength to fight against a monster of the same level, it was simply a great shame. However, if he couldn't do this, he might be able to fight, but the outcome was already decided. He was not Lu Feng's opponent. A heavenly king was not an emperor's opponent. Seeing the Tiandao crown prince's hesitation, Lu Feng smiled. It was an indescribable smile. It was arrogant, boundless, and filled with all the negative emotions of killing and destruction. Heavenly King, as a king, don't you even have the courage to fight? Today I have already defeated you. Don't you even have the courage to fight? If you still have so many scruples, if you still think that your glory is above everything, then you have already lost the ability to compete with me on the road to Emperor's Dao in the future. Because you have already lost. Once he failed, he would definitely be at an absolute disadvantage on the road to Emperor's Dao in the future. What was the Emperor's Dao territory? It was an emperor that surpassed a king. Such an existence couldn't tolerate failure. How could he allow himself to admit defeat? Since ancient times, any overlord of an era had always been a peerless figure who had never been defeated. Once he failed, then his luck would be greatly reduced. This would lead to failure. In the future, it would be difficult for him to achieve much. In the end, he would be eliminated by other heaven-defying monsters and become a foil. It could be said that Lu Feng's words hit the Tiandao crown prince's heart. If he lost this time, and in such a situation, then he would really sink completely. He might even become a foil on the road to Emperor's Dao. To the Tiandao crown prince, this was absolutely unacceptable. Then do I really have to use my strongest power to attack? Do I have to use this kind of bullying method to win? Muttering to himself, he fell into a slight daze. Lu Feng did not speak, but the madness in his eyes gradually intensified. His killing intent was slowly recovering. In such a state, if he was suppressed by the Tiandao crown prince who had completely recovered his power, in that case Lu Feng would not suffer any losses. Although he had lost, his heart was still the victor. He had lost because the time he had to cultivate was too short. Such a failure was acceptable to a monster. This battle, I can lose, but you can't lose. Heavenly King, do you understand? Lu Feng's words were like the sound of Sanskrit that awakened the Tiandao crown prince from his confusion. A trace of clarity appeared in his eyes again. Looking at Lu Feng, he sighed deeply. However, his eyes were no longer lost, no longer confused. Because he had already thought it through. Emperor, I didn't expect that as an opponent, you would be the one to wake me up. Laughable, lamentable. I can't give up the future. I won't give up. So, don't blame me for this battle. The power of power slowly recovered. In an instant, it broke through the shackles and entered the peak of the perfect stage. This was a true breakthrough. It was not comparable to Lu Feng. His main body's power of power had already begun to recover. He had already raised his main body's strength to the upheaval stage's power of power. However, when his main body reached the upheaval stage, it completely stopped. Feeling the change in the Tiandao crown prince, Lu Feng smiled slightly. However, this smile also carried a crazy bloodthirsty color. Heavenly King, you are indeed the Heavenly King. Chapter 357. Even if he gave up the idea of fighting someone of the same level, Crown Prince Wang Qingyun still did not choose that kind of crushing power. It was enough for him to advance by one level. He wanted to fight crazily, to fight until the world was turned upside down. Emperor, come on! The supreme power of the great heavenly path secret technique was the most powerful one. Great primordial vast heaven primordial itself was the name of heaven and earth. It was the name of an extremely ancient era. And this great primordial vast heaven was the existence that crushed everything in the current era, reconstructing the ancient desolation, returning the era to the ancient era, returning it to nothingness. Crushing, how similar was this to the green underworld sky? Both of them had to use the most extreme power to crush all existences. The entire illusory world seemed like it was going to collapse. This was the illusory world belonging to Crown Prince Tiandao. Its true bearing capacity was limited, it was only at the perfect realm. After all, Crown Prince Tiandao's strength was there. An overly powerful illusory world was not something he could support with his strength. This illusory world might have become abnormally strong because of Crown Prince Tiandao's reinforcement. But it still belonged to the perfect realm after all. Now, when the killing of the two had reached the peak of the perfect stage, after countless crushing killings, the two of them had reached the peak of the perfect stage. The illusory world had finally reached the brink of collapse. The primordial Taihao heaven was a manifestation of extreme violence. It was the supreme divine skill condensed by an existence of the Wuling lineage, who had entered the second heaven of the divine king realm. At this moment, when it was used by Crown Prince Tiandao, who had reached the peak of the perfect realm, the power of power was more than one level stronger than the previous silent flowing heaven. The current Crown Prince Tiandao had stepped into the peak of the domain. He could easily crush any expert at the peak of the perfect realm. Lu Feng had begun to enter the most violent state. He had already felt the threat of life and death, the terrifying power that was enough to truly erase and suppress him. However, in such a dangerous situation, he did not shrink back. Instead, he became even crazier. He wanted to use more violent means to crush and annihilate everything. The incarnation of the great emperor moved again. This time, it surpassed the previous turbulence. It was the precursor of the formation of a supreme strike. Many immortals, demons, gods had already trembled and finally disappeared into the incarnation of the great emperor. The pinnacle of all time, the supreme great emperor. The wrath of an emperor could wipe out all races. This was the majesty of a supreme emperor. This was the unparalleled wrath of an emperor. When he went crazy, all the prosperity disappeared and became the clouds of the past. Only the supreme monarch was at the peak of eternity. All the strange phenomena disappeared, leaving behind only the emperor's sole supremacy. However, this sole existence was an even more terrifying and supreme existence. One punch, it was still just one punch. Lu Feng vanished, completely fusing with the phantom of the great emperor. The two of them had completely fused. This attack surpassed the forbidden punch that Lu Feng had thrown out before. It was an even more terrifying attack. Such a blow was enough to easily suppress a martial artist at the peak of the perfect stage. It was a peerless attack in the world. Finally, Lu Feng punched towards the eternal sky. He wanted to use extreme violence to shatter the equally violent primordial boundless sky, just like how he had shattered still flow sky and encompassing sky. The collision occurred in an instant. The terrifying fluctuations were enough to kill any living being. This was an unsolvable collision. This was the ultimate output. Although Lu Feng was strong and had fused into the most powerful realm, this was the Emperor's wrath realm that even he himself could not control. However, in front of the supreme miracle performed by the Crown Prince of Heavenly Tao, who had become a martial artist at the upheaval stage, it was still not enough. At the moment of collision, the phantom of the great Emperor shook. Countless shattered rays of light were born from the body of the Emperor and fell. This was an incomparably shocking scene. It seemed to indicate the decline of the Emperor and the fall of his royal power. However, was everything really over like this? No, no. How could it end like this? How could the glory of the Emperor be blasphemed? In a trance, another ultimate attack appeared. It was a world-shaking attack that wanted to break through the obstruction of the sky. It was the strongest killing move that wanted to shatter the sea of stars. Boom, the entire illusory world had begun to collapse slightly. Heaven and earth were shattering. It seemed that in the next moment, this illusory world would completely disappear. The fist of the great emperor, or perhaps it was Lu Feng's fist, had always been there, and it was still constantly waving. Every collision was a kind of brilliance of the body, a kind of pride of the soul. However, how could Lu Feng, who had experienced countless life and death situations, be afraid of life and death, be afraid of pain? His madness was a persistence that surpassed all. It was everything in his heart. Although there were millions of dangers, he still did not take a step back. Vaguely, the beautiful golden color appeared in the sky again. Lulu knew that it was Lu Feng's blood. That was the blood of the Emperor. It was unusually beautiful, but this beauty was written with life. It was magnificent. Her eyes were slightly moist. Such a Lu Feng made Lulu feel shocked and unfamiliar. She had never thought that the man who was as gentle and quiet as a brother would actually hide such persistence, or perhaps madness. Looking at Lu Feng's madness, the crown prince of the heavenly Tao, who was constantly condensing the great chaotic clear sky in the sky, revealed a strange expression. He believed that if he were in Lu Feng's place, he would never be able to go to such an extent. It was not only because he did not have such terrifying strength, but also because he did not have Lu Feng's endless madness. Emperor, you are already enough. I admit that in the same realm, I am not your opponent. However, the future Emperor's road does not only look at the heaven-defying ability, but also the existence of actual strength. You started too late. Perhaps when you enter the same realm, I will not be able to fight against you. However, as long as I firmly suppress you by one realm, then, even if you are heaven-defying, what can you do? The current me is in the realm of the upheaval. Today, in the peak of the 7th-level sovereign realm, I have surpassed you by a full 8 levels. Even if you have touched the shackles of the forbidden realm, you will never be able to step into the forbidden realm. Therefore, you will never be able to cross this gap. You will never be able to defeat me. Emperor, this time you have lost. He lowered his arm deeply. This time, the strongest power of the great immemorial clear sky had finally appeared. In an instant, the great Emperor's projection was compressed, and infinitely compressed. Cracks appeared as the entire projection of the great Emperor broke into pieces. Faintly, one could even hear Lu Feng's mad and indignant roar. However, in the end, nothing could resist. The golden blood scattered in the void and stained the dust. However, in the end, Lu Feng was unable to break through the most terrifying and violent great immemorial clear sky. Finally, the Emperor's projection was completely annihilated by the supreme heavens. Emperor, although I have won this battle, I know that among the same realm, among all the monstrous geniuses of this era, you are truly invincible. You are an existence that has been close to the Emperor's domain ever since you were born, even after countless epochs. Unfortunately, your current strength is still too weak. If you want to truly defeat me, then go crazy. I will wait for your arrival at the peak. I will wait for the final Emperor's road, the strongest confrontation between you and me. Turning around, the Crown Prince of Tiandao's power gradually disappeared. He knew that the battle was over. Lu Feng was indeed terrifying. He was even more terrifying than him. Unfortunately, his strength was still too weak. Now, he had only advanced by a small level and was able to completely suppress Lu Feng. Glancing at Lulu, the Crown Prince of Tiandao sighed slightly but did not do anything. Lulu, I know you hate me. In the past, in order to hide, I never truly spoke. Indeed, I was too selfish. It was my selfishness that caused you to suffer so much. Cousin, I was wrong. Lulu was slightly dazed. She looked at the Crown Prince of Tiandao, unusually speechless. In Lulu's heart, the Crown Prince of Tiandao was definitely an incomparably powerful existence. Although he had never displayed his strongest innate talent in the Sky Dao race, he had still been conferred the title of Crown Prince of the Sky Dao race based on what he had displayed. As the Crown Prince, he was actually apologizing to her? Lulu was shocked. Seeing Lulu's expression, the Crown Prince of Tiandao sighed slightly. He knew that he had made too many mistakes in the past. He said that he was unable to help Lulu because of his own selfishness. If it wasn't for his selfishness, if it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to hide himself, then, even the patriarch of the Tiandao race could not casually change his voice. Because he was the future hope of the Tiandao race, the strongest source of hope for the Tiandao race to compete in the universe in the future. He was just like Lu Feng's position in the Lu family. Lu Feng was the first young master in the history of the Lu family to be equivalent to the patriarch. As long as he revealed everything, it would be the same. The Crown Prince of Tiandao looked deeply at Lulu and finally turned around. From now on, you don't have to be afraid anymore. The Tiandao race will not find trouble with you anymore. I'll make the necessary arrangements. I can't do anything about your mother's death. At that time, I really couldn't do anything. If you want to hate me, then hate me. Also, help me tell the Emperor. I will wait for him at the end of the peak. I hope that he won't make me wait too long. In the final battle, I will step on his bones and walk on the path to the Emperor's Dao. The Crown Prince of Tiandao understood. Lu Feng seemed to have been completely suppressed by him. However, he would definitely not die. Although the Crown Prince of Tiandao race was strong enough to defeat him, he was still far from being able to kill him. Moreover, how could such a heaven-defying monster die like this? Therefore, even if he didn't take a look, he knew that Lu Feng was fine. Chapter 358. The voice slowly faded away. The Tiandao Crown Prince's figure also gradually faded away. This time, although it was a victory for him, it was also a real blow. He used to think that he was unparalleled in the world. Even though the ancestor had predicted that this era would be filled with monsters and a golden era where the Emperor Dao domain would be born. However, he never thought of himself as a loser. This was confidence. He was confident that his ability was unparalleled. He was confident that with the support of the 7 Divine Kings' bloodline, Wulin's power, and the strongest and only Yellow Spring's power, he was unparalleled in the world. However, this time, when he faced Lu Feng, the monarch that had been praised in the galaxy for the past few months, he was defeated. He was completely and utterly defeated. There was no hope at all. There was no reason for him to do so. In terms of bloodline power, the strength of the 7 Divine Kings was ultimately no match for the bloodline of the number 1 sovereign personage in the world. He was only able to match Lu Feng by relying on the power of the water caltrop. However, when he used the power of the Yellow Springs that he was most proud of, which he believed to be the strongest in the world, he was completely suppressed by Lu Feng's power. Even though he had a 2-stage advantage, even though he had a king-grade martial avatar and had reached the limit of this stage of martial avatar. However, he was still mercilessly suppressed by Lu Feng, who had condensed a great emperor's avatar. This was undoubtedly the heaviest blow to the Tiandao Crown Prince. Although he had won, he really didn't want to have such a victory. Emperor, I will wait for you. After hundreds of millions of life and death experiences, crossing countless tribulations, my will is immortal, my soul is eternal. The voice gradually appeared from the void. It gradually grew louder and louder until it resounded in everyone's ears. In an instant, the figure that was about to fade away and completely disappear suddenly froze in midair, completely stunned. No one could see that the Tiandao Crown Prince's eyes were trembling with fear and disbelief. How is this possible? How is this possible? He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He couldn't believe what was about to happen. The moment he stepped into the upheaval stage, his power had already reached its limit. At that time, he had relied on the power of a peak rank 7 sovereign Dao domain to become an invincible existence under the demigod realm. The supreme divine skill, the great chaotic limitless heaven, was more than enough to easily suppress any 10 or even 100 perfect stage warriors. Although you have touched upon the forbidden area, it is absolutely impossible for you to enter that area. Why are you able to withstand it? This is impossible. This is absolutely impossible. At this moment, the Crown Prince of the Heavens Dao seemed a little crazy. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. To him, all of this was inconceivable and inconceivable. Finally, when he heard the last 4 words, he moved. The strongest power had been used once again. That was because he heard the last 4 words that made him tremble. The great demon will never die. The ancient phantom appeared once again. The heavenly Dao Crown Prince recognized this phenomenon. That was because it was this phenomenon that made him experience the illusion of sorrow and despair. However, the phenomenon that appeared at this moment was so unfamiliar that it was unbelievable. It was actually the incarnation of the great demon monarch. What appeared was the great demon monarch, the one and only, the strongest incarnation of the great demon monarch. However, the incarnation of the great demon monarch was a demonized great demon monarch. He was the great demon monarch, capable of demonizing an era and slaughtering an era, struggling in despair, wandering on the edge of death, awakening in the midst of oblivion. This was the great demon true body. This was the first divine skill bestowed by the great demon true body, the great demon undying. Heaven and earth were shattered. This time, it was truly shattered. In front of the great demon undying, the Crown Prince of the Heavens Dao unleashed the world-shocking supreme divine skill, the boundless limitless heaven. This was a supreme technique comparable to the great chaotic limitless heaven. However, when the same power was unleashed, there was no obstruction at all. In the instant of contact, it was completely shattered by the demonized great demon monarch. Pfff, blood splattered out of his mouth. At this moment, the Crown Prince of the Heavens Dao could not believe what he had just experienced. He had unleashed such a powerful attack, a supreme divine skill that was not inferior to the great chaotic limitless heaven. However, this was the outcome. He was completely suppressed and did not have the slightest ability to resist. The demonized great demon monarch was terrifying. He was Lu Feng and Lu Feng was him. At this moment, he did not stop at all. This was because Lu Feng had entered the most extreme state. The great demon undying was the most terrifying combat power that could erupt from the deepest abyss of death. Previously, Lu Feng had been completely suppressed by the great chaotic limitless heaven, causing him to lose all ability and almost walk to the edge of death. However, at this final moment, the power of the great demon undying had completely erupted, completely shattering all death and becoming the ultimate existence of power. The boundless, limitless heaven did not have the slightest ability in front of the most powerful great demon undying. It was completely shattered and turned into nothingness. Powerful. At this moment, Lu Feng could no longer be described as powerful. Finally, the great demon undying, Lu Feng, who had become the undying demon monarch, killed everything. The illusory world collapsed. Many existences stared blankly at everything that had happened. This kind of power belongs to the peak of the perfect stage. It belongs to those existences who are almost stepping into the demigod realm. But how is this possible? How is it possible that such a power appeared? How is it possible that such a power appeared in the auction house belonging to the wind god horde? Could it be that someone wants to rob the Wind God Horde's auction house? But wasn't this strength a little too weak? Wanting to rob with such strength is simply ridiculous. Sensing the increasingly frightening fluctuations coming from the auction house, many people revealed astonished expressions. After all, in the previous auctions, the auctioneer who appeared in the Wind God Horde's auction house was a deity. In addition to that auctioneer, the person guarding this auction house was also a deity. Under the protection of two deities, a peak-perfect stage expert wants to rob this place? This is simply a joke, a complete joke. No. This is not the power of a single person. I can feel that this is definitely not the power of a single person. This should be a confrontation between two martial artists at the pinnacle of the perfect stage in the auction. But aren't they courting death by doing this? Many existences were stunned. Many demigod existences had already felt it. They knew that there were two existences who were confronting each other. However, they were courting death by recklessly using their strength in the Wind God Horde's auction house. No. These two existences are confronting each other. Something is wrong. They have been fighting for such a long time. Why hasn't the Wind God Horde's auction house appeared to stop them? After a while, the terrifying fluctuations became even more tragic. Everyone could feel that the collision seemed to have reached its limit. It seemed that it was about to break through everything and really appear here. However, in the end, such a confrontation had lasted for such a long time, but no existence appeared to stop it all. No, this shouldn't be. Could it be that these two existences have such great identities that even the Wind God Horde's auction house is unwilling to offend them? A demigod seemed to have thought of something. His expression changed fiercely. The next moment, he did not stop and directly flew away. Although it was good to be lively, those who lived in foreign battlefields all understood that some lively scenes were absolutely not to be seen. There were no laws here. The only thing that existed was the principle that strength reigned supreme. The two peak-perfect stage experts collided with each other, but the Wind God Horde's auction house was unwilling to stop them. Then, the identity behind these two people was probably an existence that even the Wind God Horde's lord, a quasi-king of life and death, feared. How could they possibly participate in a matter between existences like this? As such, many of the sensible existences hurriedly left. They knew that once they were involved, their life and death would not be in their own hands. However, those who had such thoughts were always in the minority. The majority of the existences chose to remain where they were because they wanted to see exactly what had happened. At the very last moment, the peak power had completely awakened. Although it was still at the peak perfect stage, the power that erupted in an instant made everyone incomparably frightened and tremble. In an instant, the entire auction house completely collapsed. Looking at the illusory figure that broke through everything and was born between heaven and earth, all the existences were shocked. What is that, demon? That's a demon. He was a lawless, unparalleled devil. But why does he make me want to submit to him? What kind of demon is he? Many existences were frightened and roared. Unfortunately, all of this happened in an instant, because in the next moment, two figures appeared. Everything could no longer be seen. The entire Wind God Horde's auction house had completely disappeared. Even the terrifying Demon Emperor had disappeared together with it. Sure enough, this Fudu is really not simple. It's just that I really didn't expect him to be the invincible monster that caused a lot of commotion recently, the Emperor Lu Feng. Grandmaster Void Spirit stood in the boundless void and looked at Lu Feng, who had entered a state of extreme madness with the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao, and sighed slightly. Just now, when they felt the power of the collision, both of them had covered this place with their divine senses. It could be said that they were incomparably clear of everything that happened in the illusory world. However, when the illusory world collapsed and the two of them were about to appear in front of everyone, Grandmaster Void Spirit finally acted. He directly transferred the two of them to the outer region of the battlefield in the endless universe. Hearing Grandmaster Void Spirit's words, Grandmaster Wangui also did the same. However, they did not have much of a grudge against Lu Feng for hiding his identity. This was because they also knew what would happen if someone with Lu Feng's identity was discovered in the outer region of the battlefield. What a terrifying monster! The Emperor is terrifying, but this Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao is also terrifying. He shouldn't be the legendary Heavenly Emperor. I'm afraid that the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao is actually a Heavenly Emperor. This time, if it wasn't for the presence of the Emperor Lu Feng, Lulu would have been captured. Sigh, my poor disciple. Su Ling looked at Lulu, who had fallen into a coma beside him, and sighed. Sensing that the protective power around Lulu was gradually disappearing, he waved his arm again and reinforced the protective power around Lulu. It seems that this time, the Heavenly Tao race is really foolproof. I think that Lu Xiaoran should be trapped by now. Moreover, they actually chose the Wind God Auction Hall. This is one of the few places where we won't spread our divine senses. It seems that they have been planning this for a long time. Do you think I'm right, Yao Guangming? Or perhaps the great Wind God Overlord. The Wind God Overlord was a supreme existence that had already stepped into the quasi-king of life and death realm. He was an unparalleled existence that could escape from the hands of the Divine King. In this endless void of chaos, a figure gradually appeared. Every step he took was like a cycle of time and space. In a trance, every inch of space he stepped on experienced the changes of life and death, a type of destruction and rebirth. When the Void Spirit Master understood this scene, a trace of shock flashed through his eyes. He couldn't help but say, Virtual King's 10th level, the life realm. You have actually refined the life and death realm. As if he didn't hear the Void Spirit Master's words, Wind God Overlord Yao Guangming slowly walked in front of the two people. However, his gaze never left the two people fighting. This time I let him in, because I owed the Heavenly Tao race a huge favor. And this time they are the ones who made this request. Hearing this, a trace of anger flashed through the Void Spirit Master's eyes. So, you put my disciple in such a situation. You should know what will happen to her once she is captured and brought back to the Heavenly Tao race. Wind God Overlord Yao Guangming's unusually young face didn't have much of an expression. What does this have to do with me? Chapter 359. The Quasi-Life and Death Quasi-Monarch was just a tiny bit away from breaking through and entering the realm of the Supreme Being of the universe, the peerless Divine King. Yao Guangming didn't have any extravagant desires or thoughts aside from the final breakthrough. Even the position of Wind God Overlord wasn't much to him. As for the favor he owed to the Heavenly Law race, it could be said that it was his obsession. If he couldn't resolve it, it would affect his state of mind. Yao Guangming absolutely wouldn't allow such a thing to happen. Thus, he agreed to the Sky Tao Race's elders' request and allowed them to make a move in his Wind God Overlord auction house, which was one of the few places that Su Ling and Wangui's spiritual senses couldn't cover. Grandmaster Wangui sighed deeply. He knew that Yao Guangming was no longer the same Yao Guangming who needed their help a few hundred years ago. He had already stepped into the final stage of the quasi-life and death quasi-monarch realm, the greatness of the life boundary. Such a terrifying existence was already a true almighty. It could be said that he had already reached the limit below the Divine King. Even though they were alchemy grandmasters, they couldn't control such an existence. As he watched Lu Feng and the Sky Tao Crown Prince battle even more frantically, a strange look flashed across Grandmaster Wangui's eyes. He slowly asked, So, what do you plan to do now? Now, it wasn't Lulu's problem. After all, compared to the existence below, Lulu's matter was no longer a problem. The Sky Tao Crown Prince hid his strength really well. If he hadn't met Emperor Lu Feng this time, I'm afraid he wouldn't have revealed his identity and strength. A peak 7th Order Monarch Realm Freak. Such an existence can be counted on one's fingers in the entire epoch. Coupled with his identity as the Sky Dao Crown Prince, he is really the most respected existence in the universe. Yao Guangming sighed softly as he looked at the Sky Dao Crown Prince, who had the strength of a peak perfect stage monarch. As a peerless existence below the Supremes, he could naturally see that the Sky Dao Crown Prince's true strength was only that of a low-level upheaval martialist. However, a low-level upheaval martialist actually had the strength of a peak perfect stage martialist. There was no doubt that this was surpassing 7 levels and possessing the strength of a peak 7th Order Monarch realm. Grandmaster Void Spirit and Grandmaster Wan Guo both nodded lightly. They had never thought of this before, nor had they ever heard of it. The current Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao was actually such an invincible monster. He was definitely at the peak of any era. He was completely capable of reaching the Divine King's position and was qualified to become the Overlord of an epoch. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Law wasn't that famous before. In the universe, many people knew him as the Emperor of Slaughter. The Emperor of Massacre was merely an existence at the peak of the 5th step, but who would have thought that he was actually an existence of the King Dao domain? In the universe, all the princes and princes of the various races had countless names. However, according to their description, the strongest among them was only at the peak of the Emperor realm. They seemed to be monsters like the Emperor of Massacre. But now, it seemed like all the major races were hiding something. They were hiding the strength of their younger generation. In the distance, the demonic emperor, who had turned into a long despair, became even crazier. His powerful combat strength was terrifying. When they saw Lu Feng in that state, both the two grandmasters and the quasi-king of life, Yao Guangming, felt an indescribable emotion rise in their hearts. I originally thought that the current generation monster of the Lu family, the so-called Emperor Lu Feng, who was comparable to the human kings, was just a facade. Although he was strong, there was definitely a limit to his strength. But I didn't expect him to be so terrifying. This isn't an exaggeration at all. Yao Guangming's eyes flashed. He wanted to see through Lu Feng, but he realized that at this moment, Lu Feng was entangled by fate. Even with his invincible almighty strength, he could only see a little bit of it. Without a doubt, this was frightening. However, this wasn't the most terrifying because a genius like Lu Feng had the protection of an ancient race. It was normal for him to be given a certain amount of treasures. What truly shocked this invincible almighty was Lu Feng's combat strength. He is already at the peak of the Emperor Path domain, and the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince has entered the realm of drastic change. His power is enough to shock the heavens. But the Emperor, or Emperor Lu Feng, his true realm is only at the peak of evolution, but he can actually fight the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince to such a crazy extent. He has already come into contact with the forbidden power. If he is given enough combat strength, won't it be very likely that he will truly step into the ultimate Emperor Path domain before he becomes a god? The Emperor Path domain was a true forbidden domain. Once one stepped into it, they would be equivalent to the Divine King. Although it was only for a short period of time, Lu Feng was invincible in this short period of time. He was an invincible existence that could even compete with the true supreme of the universe. The three of them were silent and shock appeared in their eyes. Yao Guangming understood that although he was at the level of life stage quasi-king, he was invincible under the supremes. However, if he really faced a supreme divine king, then he would be instantly blown apart. Previously, he was able to escape from the divine king with his life only because of the help of others. If it wasn't for him, then he wouldn't have been able to escape. Moreover, once Lu Feng really entered that domain, he would not be able to do anything. Then he wouldn't be a match at all. because what Lu Feng entered was the battle taboo mythical domain, which was publicly recognized as a mythical taboo domain created for battle. Back then, the human king also entered that domain long after he became a god. And the three supreme overlords, when they were in the virtual king realm, they defeated all their opponents in the king realm. In the end, they broke the taboo domain and were invincible for an era. But he actually came into contact with the taboo domain when he was at the peak of evolution. Doesn't this mean that he might even surpass the human king? The faces of the three peerless figures in the world were extremely distorted at this moment. They seemed to be imagining the scene of Lu Feng entering that domain, the scene of this universe. Not yet a god, but he has the possibility of being on par with the divine king. At that time, he was simply an existence that couldn't be defeated. How did he do it? The beginning of a new era must be born from the Battle of the Kings. This should be the first Battle of the Kings. But why did he already touch the taboo domain? Being able to touch the taboo domain meant that he wasn't far from it. And generally, those who had such a state could only do it after countless battles with many peak king realm monsters and endless victories. Therefore, after sensing Lu Feng's taboo aura, the crown prince of Tiandao was puzzled, and they were also puzzled. Then, what do you plan to do? This time, regarding Lu Feng, what is your final plan? He was able to clash with the crown prince of Tiandao, and he was able to choose to start the Battle of the Kings in advance despite knowing the crown prince's strength. All of this must be because of Lulu. After all, Lulu should be his cousin. This time, what is your choice? Silence, endless silence. On one side, there was the crown prince of the Tiandao race. On the other side, there was the number one family in the world, the human king Lu family. In the eyes of those who didn't know, no matter how powerful the number one family in the world was, it couldn't be compared to the peak overlords. However, the Lu family was different. The Lu family was the human king Lu family. Even though they had lost their human king, the Lu family was still incomparably feared by all the other races, and it was enough to make the world tremble. Moreover, a few months ago, Lu Feng had produced two great heterodox supreme beings. Such combat strength was enough to make any peak overlord race retreat. If this is really the case, then my final choice, Lu Feng. This choice wasn't out of the expectations of the two alchemy grandmasters. This was because they understood that although Yao Guangming was indebted to the Tiandao race, compared to the human king Lu family's kindness to Yao Guangming, the difference was too great. Moreover, Yao Guangming was a human. Among the noblest people in the Wind God territory, the first was the Wind God Overlord. The two alchemy grandmasters, Su Ling and Wan Gui, couldn't be compared to Wind God Overlord Yao Guangming. Yao Guangming's attitude represented the Wind God territory's attitude. Now, this powerful quasi-king of life realm, an invincible almighty existence, belonged to the human race. It could be said that although the Wind God territory wasn't part of the human race, it wasn't much different from a territory belonging to the human race. Let's wait and see. The current battle is no longer something we can participate in. This is a battle between kings, a confrontation between the monstrous geniuses of this era. In short, no matter what, no accident can happen to Lu Feng here. Not even a little bit. Yao Guangming's gaze was firm. He didn't care about Lu Feng. Even if he was destined to become a king in the future, he didn't care. However, because Lu Feng's surname was Lu, he had to care. The two alchemy grandmasters nodded slightly and looked at the two invincible geniuses in the endless outer realm with strange gazes. Lu Feng had transformed into the strongest demonic emperor in the world from despair and returned to the world. Lu Feng's combat strength had once again risen to an unfathomable and unprecedented level. If the great demon didn't die, it would struggle in endless despair and finally break through all obstacles to transform into the terrifying power of the supreme great demon of despair. Its strength didn't lie only in its desperate strike, but also in its invincibility in the endless despair. This was the true power of the great demon, the true supreme power. The power of the great demon that Lu Feng had displayed before was only at the threshold of supreme power. Although it was strong enough to be compared to supreme power, it still wasn't supreme power. At that time, the true power of the great demon was only comparable to the power of the seventh divine king's bloodline of the heavenly Tao Crown Prince. The only difference was that Lu Feng's great demon was much stronger. Back then, when Lu Feng was completely suppressed by the great limitless heaven, he was already in the true abyss of death. At that time, Lu Feng didn't use any guardian crystals. He completely relied on his own strength and blood to resist the ultimate attack. Finally, in that endless madness, he still succeeded. He had returned from death and returned to the world of living beings. One punch, another punch. Every punch contained the power of the great demon of immortality. It was a taboo power that surpassed the previous taboo. Such a punch could shatter the power of any heaven in the great heavenly Tao secret technique. This was a massacre that shocked the heavenly Tao Crown Prince to the extreme. It was a terrifying massacre that he couldn't describe. Chapter 360. Faintly, the Tiandao Crown Prince felt that he had reached his limit. He was shocked to find that he could not suppress Lu Feng with just the strength of a warrior in the upheaval period. They were both at the peak of the 7th level King Dao domain, but he had already surpassed Lu Feng by an entire 8 levels. Logically speaking, if he wanted to defeat him in this state, Lu Feng must enter the true forbidden domain. But why? He was clearly still far away from that domain, but he was already able to unleash such a shocking attack. Shock, fear, confusion. Endless complex emotions intertwined. Finally, seemingly seeing that Lu Feng was on the verge of going berserk, the Tiandao Crown Prince used the supreme divine skill of the great Tiandao secret technique and sent Lu Feng flying far away. Taking a deep breath, he looked at Lu Feng, who was wrapped in the endless demon emperor, and his expression became incomparably solemn and resolute. Emperor, you are really close to the edge of invincibility. In this era, even if you can't become a true emperor, but your name must be passed down eternally. I hate the heavens for allowing me to be born in the same world. In the past, your bloodline ancestor, the greatest existence in history, the human king, his glory is destined to continue on your body. But, no matter what, I can't lose. I am destined to be an invincible existence in this era. I am destined to be an overlord of the Emperor's Tao all the way to the forbidden domain. How can I fail? The last attack, I hope you can still resist it. Looking at Lu Feng, who was in a frenzy, the Tiandao Crown Prince finally decided. Since ordinary supreme divine miracles were no longer able to resist, then he would choose the most extreme crazy extermination. He had already seen that if he continued, then he might really fail. The price of failure was that he could no longer tolerate it, and continuing to increase his strength was even more unacceptable. Therefore, he wanted to use this most powerful ultimate move to make Lu Feng sink completely. Then, the last attack, I hope that in the future, I will not be lonely on the path of the Emperor. I can still see your figure. Lu Feng would not admit defeat. Even if the Tiandao Crown Prince was now stronger than him, he was still the Emperor, Lu Feng, the Emperor of all kings. How could he fail? How could he admit defeat? Therefore, no matter what, Lu Feng would fight until the last moment. The ancient power of the great demon surged to the extreme. At this moment, the power of the great undying demon began to gather at its densest. Lu Feng knew that the final strike would definitely be the most powerful killing blow that would shake the heavens and earth. What he needed was the most extreme eruption. The great emperor had slowly recovered from the demonization. Emperor's realm. The emperor's realm. The emperor's emperor was emperor's emperors, and, therefore, as long as he wanted to, he could return from the endless demonization and become an unparalleled great emperor once again. Crown prince, crown emperor. At this moment, he had already entered the highest realm of this realm. He had already decided to use that supreme attack. That was a supreme secret technique that was considered absolutely taboo even in the Great Heavenly Path secret technique. Emperor, use the Human King scripture. Everyone says that the Human King scripture of the Lu family is the #1 technique in the world. Today, let's see who is more extreme. Supreme technique. Trillion sky buries the heavens. The ultimate technique of the Great Heavenly Path secret technique. The strongest killing power of the supreme technique, trillion sky buries the heavens. At this moment, billions of voids trembled, and endless illusions appeared. In the boundless void of the universe, a shocking scene was born. It was as if billions of time and space had appeared. Endless regions flickered, and billions of skies descended. The strongest supreme technique of the Great Heavenly Path secret technique, trillion sky buries the heavens, has finally appeared again. Looking at the strange scene around them, the expressions of the three sovereigns changed drastically. Trillion sky buries the heavens was too famous. It was one of the strongest supreme techniques in the world. Legend had it that the existence who had condensed this supreme technique was the most ancient peerless divine king of the Heavenly Path clan, the ancestor of the Heavenly Path, the divine king. In that era, he was also at the peak of the 7th level of the sovereign realm. In that era, he was invincible and had only been defeated once, and the opponent he lost to was the invincible supreme of that era, the ancestor of the heavenly demon clan, the great demonic emperor. It could be said that he and the great demonic emperor were the last two invincible monsters in that era. They had triumphed all the way and finally met at the end of the Emperor's Road. Both of them possessed supreme auras. Both of them had defeated numerous monstrous geniuses in order to reach their current level. The battle prowess of any one of them was much more terrifying than the current Lu Feng. In the final battle, the ancestor of the Heavenly Path, the Divine King, was defeated and lost the chance to become the Overlord of this era. However, he was still in existence that made people tremble in fear. After becoming the Divine King and remaining silent for countless years, he finally faced the Overlord of this era, the great demonic emperor, in an earth-shattering battle. Although he was defeated again, his defeat also severely injured the great demonic emperor. This battle shocked the world. The invincible killing power that had severely injured the great demonic emperor was the most powerful supreme technique of the legendary Great Heavenly Path secret technique, Trillion Sky buries the heavens. Now, when they saw the billions of skies in the starry sky and the endless trembling, they once again thought of the Great Heavenly Path secret technique as the most terrifying supreme technique in the legends. Is he trying to kill Lu Feng? The Void Spirit Grandmaster frowned slightly, his expression solemn. He also knew that this kind of power couldn't kill Lu Feng. However, when they really saw this terrifying power take shape, their hearts still trembled. No, if he wants to kill Lu Feng, he only needs to release a sufficiently powerful cultivation base. The Sky Dao Crown Prince's true cultivation base is that of a perfect martialist. Once he releases all his power, no matter how strong Lu Feng is, he won't be a match for the Sky Dao Crown Prince as long as he doesn't enter the Emperor Dao domain. He probably has no choice but to use this last invincible power, no choice but to be shocked. The Void Spirit Grandmaster and Grandmaster Wangui were both alchemy grandmasters. Although they had already reached the Heavenly Master realm, the average virtual king wouldn't be a match for them. However, because of their status as alchemy grandmasters, they had never made a move before. Therefore, the two of them couldn't see anything wrong with their performance. However, the wind god Overlord Yao Guangming was different. His battle experience was extremely rich. He had reached the quasi-life and death quasi-monarch realm by killing his way up step by step. Therefore, he saw through everything with a single glance. He saw through the Sky Dao Crown Prince's helplessness. The Sky Dao Crown Prince has already lost the confidence to win. Even with his current power, he doesn't dare to believe that he can suppress Lu Feng, who is only at the peak evolution stage. Hearing this, the two alchemy grandmasters revealed shocked expressions. They looked at each other and saw the disbelief in each other's eyes. How is this possible? How is this possible? How can Lu Feng be so tyrannical and extreme? If they were on the same level, they would believe that Lu Feng could make the Sky Dao Crown Prince feel fear, and even defeat him. After all, in the past few months, they had heard countless legends about Lu Feng. Since there was such a legend, it was reasonable for his strength to be terrifying. However, there should be a limit to this level of fear. Lu Feng, shouldn't he also be a monster at the peak of the 7th stage Emperor Dao domain? How can he force the Sky Dao Crown Prince to this extent? The Sky Dao Crown Prince is in existence on the same level as Lu Feng. However, how can he be helpless against Lu Feng? Grandmaster Wangui was shocked. He really didn't understand how such a shocking scene could happen. However, the wind god Overlord didn't say anything about his shock, because he knew that he couldn't explain it to Wangui and Su Ling, the two alchemy grandmasters. Moreover, there was no need for him to explain it, because in a distant place, the strongest collision finally appeared. Billions of heavens burying the heavens, burying billions of heavens. It was the strongest supreme technique that could severely injure an overlord of an era. In the present era, it was one of the strongest killing techniques. Although the Sky Dao Crown Prince's strength was only at the peak perfection stage, the power he displayed was enough to make even a demigod tremble in fear. In an instant, the millions upon millions of heavens that appeared were shattered. Millions upon millions of heavens buried the heavens, causing millions upon millions of space-time skies to crumble, producing the ultimate power. According to legends, this was an eternal killing power that could even destroy the laws of the universe. In the void, within a radius of 1,000,000 li, everything turned into dust and became nothingness. Within a radius of 1,000,000 li, that was a place that surpassed a second-grade life planet. However, at this moment, under the killing technique of a peak perfection stage expert, such a huge world was completely destroyed. Lu Feng stood in place and didn't move. He allowed the surrounding space-time to collapse, the void of heaven and earth, and the space-time to fluctuate freely. He didn't move. He didn't move at all. Endless demonic power flickered and turned into an eternal ball of light that entered Lu Feng's body. Behind his body, a huge martial Dao incarnation, the sky-piercing Futu that destroyed the heavens and earth and connected eternity to the end, appeared again. At this moment Lu Feng's aura soared. However, he still didn't move. He still didn't move an inch. When the endless destruction was about to arrive, the ancient great emperor's phantom slowly trembled. It seemed to be undergoing a shocking transformation. Endless immortal and demonic visions, the worship of gods, the devotion of all living beings, and the eternal law of heaven and earth appeared again. Lu Feng's madness completely retreated. At this moment, he seemed to have changed. He no longer had the bloodlust and madness from before. He stood quietly in the universe, allowing his endless visions to protect him, surround him, and bloom for him. The tempering of life and death, I have taken the first step towards eternity. With a gentle step, he crossed the long river of space-time. At this moment, Lu Feng actually walked slowly towards the endless world of destruction. It doesn't matter. I have dominated billions of reincarnations. Even if all living beings go against me, I will still enjoy the glory and splendor of my eternal life. In this life, I will be invincible. In this life, I will be at the peak of all eternity, however, I will be the Emperor. Chapter 361. I am the Emperor. I am the Emperor. The great Emperor's phantom finally moved. His eyes slowly opened, seeing through everything, looking down on everything. There was no emotion, but it gave people the majesty of a supreme emperor. At this moment, he gently raised his arm. At this moment, Lu Feng gently raised his arm. I am the Emperor. This was one of Lu Feng's 3 great martial skills. But at this moment it was like the great demon immortal, it was used by Lu Feng in such a special way. They did not release the strongest killing power, but became a kind of hazy blessing, completely superimposing on Lu Feng's body. I am the Supreme Emperor's Qi. This was the strongest Emperor's power. The great demon immortal's Qi. This was the strongest great demon immortal's power. The Emperor's robe, the endless immortal demon divine spirit Tao. This was the strongest strange power. The 3 supreme powers were the most powerful killing forces that could make the entire universe tremble in fear. With one power, one would have the ability to become a 6th-stage monstrous genius in the King Tao domain and become the King of Massacre. And with 2 powers, a 7th-stage monstrous genius in the King Tao domain was bound to be conferred the title of King. It was an existence that could determine the final victory of the Emperor's road. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao had the power of no caltrops, the power of the Yellow Springs, and a supreme power that was not considered supreme, the power of the 7 divine kings' bloodline. Therefore, he walked to the peak and became the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao, becoming the most glorious existence in this era. But what about Lu Feng? The Emperor's power, the great demon immortal's power, the strange power, the 3 supreme powers were truly the pinnacle of supreme powers. He alone possessed 3 types of supreme power. At this moment, the 3 supreme powers were all mobilized by Lu Feng, and he was blessing his body. There was a kind of emptiness in his eyes. No emotion could be seen, but such a pair of eyes was terrifying and made people tremble. Finally, Lu Feng slowly raised his arm. Burn, my bloodline! His bloodline was burning furiously. Lu Feng's blood was the blood of a king. It had already surpassed the limits of this era. It was the bloodline of a true supreme human king. According to the legends, the human king was the most heaven-defying existence of this era. Apart from the immortal devil era, he was the greatest king. The human king was bestowed the title of king. From then on, no one dared to call themselves the human king. I hate the heavens for granting me the Emperor's order to live in the same world as the Emperor. He was the number 1 king since ancient times. This was the human king. This was the bloodline of the greatest king. Lu Feng possessed the bloodline closest to the mortal monarch in the entire history of the Lu family. Therefore, he was born to be supreme, the noblest bloodline in the universe. Therefore, his bloodline was the noblest among all bloodlines. Therefore, the power of his bloodline was truly a supreme power. Therefore, Lu Feng possessed 4 supreme powers. Billions of galaxies, I am eternal, time and space revolve, I am the Emperor, fate and karma, I am the great devil, everything and everything, I am, soul supremacy. Supreme law, soul supremacy. Lu Feng had surpassed his own limits. He had actually unleashed the most powerful supreme law in all of history, under such a realm and with such limitless support. This was incomparable craziness. This was the true craziness in his heart. Soul supremacy finally blossomed on this day. Heaven and earth were in chaos. There was no light. Time and space were shattered. In a trance, billions of dimensions were shattered. Billions of heavens buried billions of heavens. Soul supremacy, fate and karma, time and space revolve, billions of galaxies, all must be the Emperor. Everything must reign supreme in the galaxies. This moment of collision was indescribable. because they had never seen such an extreme evolution stage martial artist. They had never seen such a will that could shake everything. Slightly raising his arm, Wind God Overlord Yao Guangming's eyes flashed with a hint of strangeness. He looked at the center of the endless destruction and suddenly smiled. It was an indescribable smile, because he really couldn't describe how he felt at this moment. In his opinion, the strength of an ant like Luo Yunyang was simply not enough to pose any threat to him. However, when he saw the collision, he actually felt a sense of disbelief. This was a sense of crisis, a sense of avoidance by a powerful existence towards extreme danger. This was something that he could not believe. The power of Caltrops, the power of the Yellow Springs, the power of the Great Devil, the power of the Monarch, the power of the Bloodline, and that unknown, strange supreme power, 6 types of supreme strength. There are actually 6 types of supreme strength here. Lin Feng was astonished. There are actually 6 supreme powers. Tiandao Crown Prince, you have one. What a pity. One. Looking at everything in front of him in a daze, Tiandao Crown Prince felt a trace of sadness in his eyes. I won, perhaps this is my greatest sorrow. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao could only smile bitterly and helplessly as he looked at the endless void across from him. The only thing he could do was smile bitterly. He had won, there was nothing wrong with that. However, he had failed again. His body was covered in cuts and bruises. He had lost without any complaint. This was because, at the very last moment, he finally shattered his cultivation and entered his true peak state. As a perfect martialist, he had the power of a peak 7th-order monarch Dao domain. This kind of power was something that ordinary peak demigods couldn't compare to. They would be completely suppressed. Therefore, his opponent, Lu Feng, had been completely defeated. However, he was also the loser. It was because he had unleashed his own power. What a miserable victory! A bitter smile, a helpless smile, a sorrowful smile. At this moment, the Tiandao Crown Prince found it hard to describe his feelings. He used to be high-spirited and unbeatable, overlooking billions of peerless geniuses. In the reincarnation era, only the demonic geniuses who eventually became the overlords of the eras could be compared to him. However, when he was full of confidence, he met Lu Feng. A battle of the pinnacle. This was the battle of the pinnacle of the younger generation in the current universe. In any space-time, this was the battle of the pinnacle of the younger generation in this realm. Originally, he had wanted to use Lu Feng's existence to help him achieve the first victory in this battle of the monarchs, so that he could be one step ahead on his future path to Emperor's Tao. Although Lu Feng was very powerful and was known as the pinnacle genius of this era, in his opinion, this was just a boast from the Lu family. Even if Lu Feng was a genius with a peak 7th-order monarch Tao domain, it was impossible for him to be very powerful, even if he could control 2 kinds of supreme power. Unfortunately, he was wrong, very wrong. In a battle of the same level, he had taken countless advantages and even summoned a 7th-order monarch Tao clone. However, in the end, he was mercilessly suppressed by Lu Feng, who was at his limit. He didn't even have the chance to fight back. In order to win, in order to have the possibility to continue fighting on the path to Emperor's Tao in the future, he finally listened to Lu Feng's suggestion and released his own power. However, he was still defeated. The Crown Prince of Tiandao knew that in the final collision, he had used the Heaven's Burial of Billions. He was obviously one level higher, but he was still defeated. He was completely defeated, with cuts and bruises all over his body. In fact, my defeat is also reasonable. I am already strong enough. The power of no caltrops is enough to compare with the supreme power of any pinnacle genius. And my power of the Yellow Spring is one of the strongest supreme powers since ancient times. In addition to the power of my bloodline of the 7 Divine King, this is the existence of a quasi-supreme power. It can be said that there are too few peak 7th-order monarch Dao geniuses who can compare with me. However, I still can't compare with you. Emperor, you are really too terrifying. You are the #1 genius in the world. He sighed deeply and felt completely helpless. The power of the Emperor, the power of bloodline, and the power of the great demon. These three supreme powers, any one of them was comparable to the power of the Yellow Spring. They were existences that surpassed the power of no caltrops. As for the strange power that Lu Feng released, it vaguely seemed to surpass these supreme powers. Lu Feng, who had 4 supreme powers, was not someone he could compete with. No wonder, according to the rumors of the human race, you have the possibility to compare with your ancestor, the human king. 4 supreme powers, indeed, you are almost comparable to the old ancestor and the human king. He turned around and did not take another look. This time, he won. Although it was not a glorious victory, he had indeed won. This also meant that he could continue fighting on the path to Emperor's Dao in the future. Emperor, in the future, I will be even stronger. Although you are already invincible in the same realm. But I still want to fight for the Emperor's domain. Although I am not as monstrous as you, I have a cultivation speed that you can't compare with. In the future, in terms of cultivation speed, I will always surpass you. The Tiandao Crown Prince turned around to leave. Since everything had been exposed, there was no need for him to stay here any longer. Since he had agreed to the mission, he would complete it. If it had been in the past, he might not have been able to do anything about Lulu. But now that everything had been exposed, it did not matter. It did not matter anymore. However, just as the Tiandao Crown Prince was about to leave, an incomparably large crack appeared in the void. An existence slowly descended from the crack in the void. When he saw the being, the Tiandao Crown Prince lost his usual respect. He only nodded slightly and said, "Old ancestor, you are here." The one who had descended was an old ancestor of the Tiandao clan's Wuling branch. This old ancestor had reached the level of the virtual king. This time, he and another old ancestor had revived and come here for Lulu. Now that he had appeared, the Tiandao Crown Prince understood that the two of them would no longer be able to trap Lulu's grandfather, Lu Xiaoran of the Lu family. The other old ancestor was probably using his final trump card to restrain Lu Xiaoran. He had only come here to help the Tiandao Crown Prince. The Tiandao clan's old ancestor nodded slightly when he heard the Tiandao Crown Prince's words. He looked strangely at the endless world of destruction behind the Tiandao Crown Prince and asked slowly, "Qingyun, what happened?" The Tiandao Crown Prince did not answer. He only shook his head slightly. The Tiandao clan's old ancestor was slightly taken aback when he saw this. He had never seen Wang Qingyun like this before. Although the Tiandao Crown Prince could not be said to be a coward, he was completely respectful and reverent in front of these old ancestors. He had never shown such an expression before. However, when he thought of the Tiandao Crown Prince's status, the old ancestor did not say anything else. He only continued to ask, "Then she must be in your hands, right? You didn't encounter any obstruction from the 2 grandmasters this time, did you?" Although he was no longer in the Wind God Territory's auction house. However, the Tiandao clan's ancestor didn't think that the Tiandao Crown Prince would fail. After all, the person he wanted to capture was only an intermediate psychic. The Crown Prince shook his head and looked at the ancestor seriously for the first time. "Forefather, from now on, don't make things difficult for Lulu. I have already promised her that from now on, the Tiandao race will no longer have any designs on her." Chapter 362. In an instant, the Tiandao Patriarch was stunned. He stared at the Tiandao Crown Prince in disbelief. He didn't understand why he would say such a thing. After a long while, A slightly embarrassed expression appeared on his face. As the patriarch of the Wuling branch of the Tiandao race's royal family, he had already reached the level of the virtual king. Although the Tiandao crown prince was the massacre emperor, this kind of existence was nothing in his eyes. In terms of status, he was also a disciple of the main branch. Furthermore, he had already reached the great accomplishment level. Although the massacre emperor might be stronger than him in the future, this was still just a possibility. Therefore, although Wang Qingyun was now the Tiandao crown prince, he really wasn't much in the patriarch's eyes. Now, when he sensed the Tiandao crown prince's disregard for his orders, the patriarch was naturally furious. However, when he thought about the fact that this was the outside world and that a collision had just occurred, the Tiandao patriarch suppressed his anger in order to protect the dignity of the Wuling branch of the Tiandao race's royal family. He said slowly, "Crown Prince, Lulu is one of the great plans for the future revival of our royal family. Her body contains the bloodline of that family. Furthermore, after that peculiar mutation, her bloodline will have unimaginable benefits for the extreme awakening of our royal family's bloodline. If we have her, we can even nurture a true monarch path freak. She isn't recognized by that family, so there won't be much danger if we bring her back. You should know how terrifying that bloodline is." The Tiandao crown prince had a helpless look on his face when he heard this. That bloodline referred to the human monarch bloodline of the Lu family. How could he not know how terrifying this bloodline was? It should be said that he knew it better than anyone else. The emperor he had just collided with was probably the existence with the strongest bloodline in the history of the human monarch Lu family. He simply didn't have the power to resist such an emperor. It could be said that the Tiandao crown prince knew the tyrannical power of the human monarch Lu family better than anyone else. Seeing the crown prince's expression, the old ancestor thought that the crown prince had gradually realized something. He thought for a moment, and in the end, he continued, "Crown Prince, you must know that the person we've nurtured is a monstrous genius of the Tao of monarchs who possesses a portion of that clan's power. He is a true monstrous genius that has the potential to become the divine king. Monstrous geniuses of the Tao of monarchs, just one of them was enough to make their name known throughout the entire universe. They were peerless existences that wouldn't even appear in an ordinary era. Even a peak overlord race like the Heavenly Tao race had to rack their brains in order to nurture a rank 6 monstrous genius in the King Tao domain. However, Tiandao Crown Prince remained expressionless. I've said it before. There's no need to continue with Lulu's matters in the future. This is not my request because this is my request." These were incomparably domineering words that were filled with an unquestionable flavor. The two grandmasters and wind god Overlord Yao Guangming, who were hiding in the endless void, had no doubts about the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince's tyranny. This was because they knew that the current Heavenly Tao Crown Prince, who had revealed everything, was no longer the Wang Qingyun of the past. Standing within a rank 7 peak King Tao domain, he was able to look down on all living beings. He was an invincible genius that hadn't appeared in an era. Such an existence would be the noblest in any peak race. This was because, as long as they didn't die, they would definitely be able to become the divine king. This meant that they had the qualifications to become the greatest existence in an era, the overlord of an era. Therefore, although they weren't the divine king, their status within their race was definitely comparable to that of the divine king. However, the Wuling patriarch clearly didn't know this. "Do you mean that the plan that my Wuling patriarch has been working on all this time is going to be delayed because of your promise? Do you mean that your promise is more important than a monstrous genius in the King Tao? Wang Qingyun, you are the crown prince of the Heavenly Tao race. However, don't forget that the Heavenly Tao race doesn't lack the royal bloodline. Perhaps you are already the Emperor of Massacre. However, as long as our race nurtures you, we can still nurture a few emperors of massacre. Therefore, don't think too highly of yourself." The Wu Ling branch's ancestor was enraged after being contradicted in such a manner. If the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince hadn't been selected by the Heavenly Tao race, and if he hadn't been the Emperor of Massacre, this patriarch would have already made a move and completely suppressed this ignorant junior. However, although he couldn't suppress him due to various reasons, he could still punish this lawless junior who didn't know his place. Therefore, his immense prestige began to blossom. He was the virtual king, an almighty existence in the king realm. In his eyes, even deities were like ants. Not to mention the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince, who wasn't even a deity. In the face of such prestige, the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince's face turned pale. However, he didn't move a single step. He just stared coldly at the patriarch. All these years, in order to endure his identity, he had suffered enough. As a crown prince of the Heavenly Tao race, he didn't have any authority. He was just a decoration. This was the case in all the major races and dynasties. However, how could the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince, who had the qualifications to become the overlord of an epoch, tolerate this? Especially now, after suffering such a huge blow from Lu Feng, he couldn't bear it anymore. From his bosom, he took out a sharp arrow filled with a cold aura. Just like that, he raised it gently. In an instant, the Heavenly Tao Patriarch's prestige was completely offset. In fact, the aura emitted from the sharp arrow directly hit the Heavenly Tao Patriarch, instantly injuring him. He spat out a mouthful of blood. However, the Heavenly Tao Patriarch turned a blind eye to this. It was as if he wasn't the one who was injured. At this moment, all his attention was focused on the sharp arrow in the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince's hand. This is the condensation of the primogenitor's will. The primogenitor wasn't the Wuling bloodline's primogenitor. Everyone knew who the primogenitor was referring to. It was the Heavenly Tao race's current paragon, the Master of the Heavenly Tao. Every paragon of the Heavenly Tao race would be crowned with the title of Master of the Heavenly Tao. This was similar to how the Divine King of the Indra bloodline was known as the Divine King of the Indra bloodline. As for the Master of the Heavenly Tao, his strongest will condensation was his martial Tao avatar. His martial Tao avatar was the existence of this sharp arrow. If it was someone else, they might not be able to recognize it. However, as the virtual king of the Heavenly Tao race, how could he not be familiar with the aura of the Master of the Heavenly Tao? This sharp arrow emitted the aura of the Master of the Heavenly Tao. How is this possible? This is the condensation of the primogenitor's martial Tao avatar. Even the primogenitor would need hundreds of years of refining to condense such power. This is practically the Patriarch's martial Tao avatar. Among the races, even the great and invincible almighties aren't qualified to receive such a gift. You're the Emperor of Massacre. How could you be bestowed with such a thing? The Heavenly Tao Patriarch was going crazy. What was happening in front of him was so shocking that he couldn't believe it. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race sneered at the terrified Heavenly Tao Patriarch. His pale face gradually recovered. At this moment, his aura began to slowly expand. He broke through the elementary perfect stage, intermediate perfect stage, advanced perfect stage, demigod, first level, second level, third level, fourth level. Finally, the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao realm's power reached demigod realm 4 and stabilized. When the Heavenly Tao Patriarch felt the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race's might, his eyes flashed with an indescribable shock. Seventh level. Peak 7th level sovereign realm. You. After saying you 3 times, he couldn't find the words to continue. At this moment, the Heavenly Tao Patriarch understood everything. He finally understood why the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race was acting out of character this time. He was so confident that he didn't care about anything at all. With the protection of the martial Tao avatar, even the ancient virtual king of the 5th level or higher wouldn't be able to kill him. Moreover, the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao realm had such a status. That's right. Compared to you, a 6th level Sovereign Realm monster is nothing. A 6th level Sovereign Realm monster and a peak 7th level Sovereign Realm monster. Although there was only a difference of 1 level between the two, the difference between the two was indescribable. A 6th level Sovereign Realm monster had the potential to become a supreme being. However, a 7th level Sovereign Realm monster was destined to become a supreme being. Many 6th level Sovereign Realm monsters would be born in an era. However, a peak 7th level Sovereign Realm monster might not even be born in an era. Since ancient times, countless eras had been born. However, only the 6th level Sovereign Realm monster could leave his name and be remembered by future generations. The reason for all of this was the existence of the Overlord of an era. It could be said that only when an Overlord of an era was born could an era Sovereign Realm monster leave his name behind. If an Overlord of an era was born, then a peak 7th level Sovereign Realm monster would be needed. Therefore, although there was only a difference of 1 level between a peak 7th level Sovereign Realm monster and a 6th level Sovereign Realm monster, the difference in status was like heaven and earth. Now, the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race no longer hid his identity. Then, his terror would be engraved in the minds of an entire epoch. In the entire Heavenly Tao race, perhaps only the Master of the Heavenly Tao could compare to such an existence. After all, the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race, who had revealed his identity, was destined to become a supreme being. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race didn't say anything as he looked at the Patriarch of the Heavenly Tao race. He simply turned around and flew toward the battlefield in the outer region. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race knew that during the peak of his clash with Lu Feng, his illusory realm had already collapsed and turned into nothingness after being struck by Lu Feng's great demon Undying. The fact that he and Lu Feng had appeared here was probably because an exceptional powerhouse had transferred space and time and sent them here. Although he didn't know who it was, the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race understood that the person who had done all this was trying to protect him and Lu Feng and conceal their identities. The Patriarch of the Heavenly Tao race hesitated slightly as he watched the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race leave. In the end, he turned around and followed the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race to the outer region. He knew that the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race, who had revealed his identity, was no longer someone he could compare to. In the entire Heavenly Tao race, perhaps only the Master of the Heavenly Tao race could compare to such an existence. He was only a monarch realm patriarch. Regardless of whether it was status or identity, he was far from being comparable to the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao race. Chapter 363. Looking at the disappearing figures of the two, 3 existences slowly walked out from the void. Next to them were the unconscious Lulu and Lu Feng, who were protected by the power of the Guardian Crystal. When Lu Feng had been severely injured and unconscious, Yao Guangming had already saved Lu Feng. The 3 of them were far stronger than the Tiandao race's King Domain Elder. Therefore, their concealment and movements had gone unnoticed. Yao Guangming sighed softly as he watched the Tiandao Crown Prince disappear. A strange emotion appeared in his heart. From this moment on, the Tiandao Crown Prince will truly be the Tiandao Crown Prince. The 2 alchemy grandmasters nodded gently. However, when they looked at Lu Feng, who was protected by the light screen, they had a strange feeling. Then, what about him? The Tiandao Crown Prince had displayed exceptional power and become the current Crown Prince of the Tiandao race, a peak race. He was the true Crown Prince. Then, what about Lu Feng? What did this person, who could completely suppress the Tiandao crown prince of the same level, amount to. It seems like the legends are true. The Lu clan has really given him the highest position in the clan. It was rumored that Lu Feng was the young master of the Lu family and had the same authority as the head of the Lu family. This was something that had never happened before. None of the people who heard the rumors were willing to believe them. However, at this moment they believed them. After all, the potential Lu Feng had displayed was absolutely worthy of such a title. The young master of the Lu family, the Lu family's godslayer, and the Tiandao crown prince. Chaotic times, great times, and prosperous times have arrived. 3 supreme emperors who had surpassed the emperor of slaughter had been born. The future is destined to be incomparably brilliant and glorious. Crown Prince, I can sense a boundless aura of destruction in that space-time. This aura seems to be. The Tiandao race's patriarch had already abandoned his former arrogance. He already understood that the Heavenly Dao Crown Prince beside him would be the true Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao clan. He would be the strongest and most terrifying Crown Prince in history. He would be comparable to the greatest primogenitor of the Heavenly Law race in the past, an invincible monster that could compete with the great demonic Sky Emperor. Because of this, the ancestor was willing to treat the Crown Prince with respect. This was a great existence who would definitely become the Heavenly Dao Lord in the future and even the Overlord of this epoch. Hearing the old ancestor's words, Crown Prince Tiandao paused in his steps. A trace of helplessness flashed in his eyes. Ancestor, you're right. That is indeed the power of my Heavenly Dao's strongest ultimate technique, the great Heavenly Dao secret technique. Due to the uniqueness of the Heavenly Dao clan, the secret technique they used also had a unique energy fluctuation. This patriarch of the Tiandao clan was a direct descendant of the Wuling bloodline. He was also a top genius back then. Naturally, he had also cultivated the great Heavenly Path secret technique. Therefore, it was normal for him to be able to sense the existence of the power within it. Seeing Crown Prince Tiandao admit it, a strange emotion flashed across the patriarch's eyes. Naturally, he knew that Crown Prince Tiandao was not an idiot. To be able to make Crown Prince Tiandao, a rank 7 peak genius of the King Path, use the ultimate combat power of the great Heavenly Path secret technique, his opponent must be extremely terrifying. He knew about Lulu. She was only an intermediate psyche master. Naturally, it was impossible for Crown Prince Tiandao to fight against her. Therefore, it was highly likely that Tiandao had encountered a peerless enemy. For a moment, the patriarch of the Heavenly Dao clan became slightly nervous. Now that he knew Crown Prince Tiandao's identity, he attached great importance to this future hope of the Heavenly Dao clan. Naturally, he would not allow any accidents to happen to this great existence who was destined to be the divine king and who was going to compete for the position of overlord of this epoch. Could it be that someone knows about the Crown Prince's identity? This was the only possibility he could think of. After all, if Crown Prince Tiandao used the great Heavenly Path secret technique, it meant that Crown Prince Tiandao had already entered the rank 7 peak realm of the King Path. As long as the other party was not an idiot, they would definitely understand what this meant. Crown Prince Tiandao hesitated for a moment when he saw how nervous the virtual King Patriarch was. Finally, he nodded. Instantly, a cold light flashed in the Patriarch of the Heavenly Dao clan. Crown Prince, is he dead? If not, I will return this time and kill him completely. No matter what his identity is, don't worry. Don't worry, no one will discover my identity if I make a move. If necessary, I will self-destruct. No one will suspect the Heavenly Dao clan. This was a great sacrifice. For the sake of the clan, any clan member would be willing to die. The patriarch of the Heavenly Dao clan was no exception. Naturally, he knew what would happen if Crown Prince Tiandao's identity was exposed. Previously, Lu Feng was rumored to be comparable to a human king. This also meant that he had the power of a rank 7 peak realm of the king path. After this news spread, even the divine king had taken action. From this, it could be seen how terrifying and extreme a rank 7 peak realm of the king path was. Therefore, if people really found out that Crown Prince Tiandao was as monstrous as Lu Feng, it would be terrifying. Crown Prince Tiandao would have to be extremely careful in the future. For the sake of the clan's future, the patriarch of the Heavenly Dao clan naturally would not allow such a situation to happen. Therefore, he had already made up his mind to kill. He did not even hesitate to sacrifice himself. Unfortunately, Crown Prince Tiandao could only smile helplessly at his thoughts. Patriarch, this matter is no longer something you can participate in. Previously, I did clash with someone. That person's strength was only at the peak of the evolution period. Hearing the opponent's level, the patriarch of the Heavenly Dao clan relaxed. The Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao represented the highest level of combat strength. Even if a human king was reborn, it was absolutely impossible for a peak evolution period Crown Prince Tiandao to defeat a perfect stage Crown Prince Tiandao. However, the patriarch of the Heavenly Dao clan was puzzled. This was because Crown Prince Tiandao had used the power of the Great Heavenly Dao's secret technique. One had to know that using the power of the Great Heavenly Dao's secret technique meant that Crown Prince Tiandao had already unleashed his full strength. However, his opponent was merely a peak evolution period Crown Prince Tiandao. Did he really need to unleash his full strength to deal with such an opponent? This was impossible. Crown Prince Tiandao sighed softly. My opponent is a peak evolution stage ancient martial art practitioner. As for me, in order to be able to fight with him, I suppressed myself to the peak evolution stage. It is also because of this reason that I used the power of the Great Heavenly Path secret technique. At this moment, the patriarch of the Heavenly Dao clan was slightly stunned. A moment later, his expression changed drastically. He looked at Crown Prince Tiandao with disbelief in his eyes. How is this possible? If Crown Prince Tiandao had to suppress his cultivation to fight, it meant that that person was qualified to make Crown Prince Tiandao take action. This meant that Crown Prince Tiandao's opponent was at least a 6-stage monstrous existence in the King Dao domain. Moreover, at the last moment, Crown Prince Tiandao had even used the power of the Great Heavenly Dao secret technique. This meant that the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Dao's opponent was an existence comparable to him. This was a peak evolution period Crown Prince Tiandao's monstrous existence that was comparable to Crown Prince Tiandao's peak evolution period Crown Prince Tiandao. Such a monstrous existence also meant that Crown Prince, could it be? Crown Prince Tiandao's gaze was strange. He turned slightly and looked in the direction of Wind God City. His tone was unusually deep. That's right. He is also a peak 7th stage monstrous existence in the King Dao domain. Taking a deep breath, the patriarch of the Heavenly Dao clan found it hard to believe. A peak 7th stage monstrous existence in the King Dao domain was practically an existence that had not appeared in countless eras. It was even possible that an entire era might not even have one. But now, other than Crown Prince Tiandao, there was actually another one. Moreover, this person actually met Crown Prince Tiandao and even fought against him. This is a little too hard to believe. You should know his name as well. After all, during this period of time, his reputation has been very big. After a moment of silence, the patriarch of the Heavenly Dao clan woke up from his shock. His eyes shone brightly. In just an instant, he thought of something. Because there was only one person who met this condition. It's the Emperor. Lu Feng. Crown Prince Tiandao nodded slightly and then shook his head. To be precise, it's the Emperor Lu Feng. This time, because of Lulu, we have collided in advance. It is also because of us that the most glorious battle of this era, the War of the Kings, has officially begun. The patriarch of the Heavenly Tao clan naturally knew what the War of the Kings represented. It was the prelude to the true chaotic era. It was the precursor to the birth of a true Overlord. The War of the Kings was the most tragic supreme battle of this era that all monstrous geniuses had to participate in. They could participate in it. They had to participate in it. It was the most glorious, most magnificent, and most tragic battle of this era. It could be said that in the face of such a battle, even the Divine King would pale in comparison. Although the existences that participated in the War of the Kings were currently very weak. However, they were all destined to become invincible in the future. They were all existences that were destined to become supreme existences, or even supreme existences like the Divine King. Moreover, among these supreme monarchs, there was destined to be an ultimate monarch in the Emperor Tao domain. In other words, there was destined to be an overlord of this era. Therefore, in front of this War of the Kings, even supreme existences like the Divine King would pale in comparison. The Heavenly Tao Patriarch could never have imagined that the War of the Kings, which was enough to shake the entire universe, would actually begin and pass just like that. Then, the Crown Prince must have won. When he arrived, only the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince was present. This proved that the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince had won. However, when he heard this, a trace of helplessness appeared on the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince's face. I have won. However, I have failed. The Heavenly Tao Patriarch looked at the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince in confusion. The Tiandao Crown Prince let out a deep sigh as he looked at the distant Divine Wind City with a strange expression. Although I won in the end. Strictly speaking, I was the loser in the battle against the Emperor. In a battle of the same level, he could have completely suppressed me. Chapter 364. Gradually, Lu Feng finally woke up from his endless coma. The previous battle had caused him too much damage. At the last moment, he had used too many forbidden secret techniques. It could be said that Lu Feng had used all the powers that he could. This time, Lu Feng had really reached his peak and unleashed the most powerful attack he had ever unleashed. The power of the Great Devil, the power of the Monarch, the power of the Bloodline, and the power of the Strange. The four supreme powers, any one of them was not inferior to the Sky Tao Crown Prince's power of the Yellow Springs. Lu Feng had unleashed all four supreme powers at once. If not for the existence of the Great Devil True Body, Lu Feng, who had relied on these four supreme powers to unleash the supreme technique, would have been completely destroyed long ago. Of course, even with the Great Devil True Body and the frightening physical strength, Lu Feng still felt that his body was seriously injured. After all, he had unleashed the supreme technique, and under such circumstances that could be said to have surpassed all limits, the backlash he had suffered was still too great. Feeling everything in his body, Lu Feng smiled helplessly. After struggling for a moment, he finally sat up with difficulty. Looking at the unfamiliar surroundings, Lu Feng rubbed his head slightly. He began to recall everything that had happened before. It seems that at the last moment I had used the supreme technique. After unleashing the four supreme powers, I had completely fainted at the most glorious moment of the collision. Fortunately, I had taken out the Guardian Crystal before unleashing the final attack. Otherwise, this time I would have definitely been destroyed. If that kind of collision and destruction had happened when he had lost consciousness, Lu Feng would have really died. After all, although his body was now very strong and had reached the level of 7 times amplification, he had not entered the realm of deification. This should be the Alchemist Guild Hall. After sizing it up for a long time, Lu Feng finally saw it clearly. The architectural style of this place, other than the Alchemist Guild Hall, could not be found anywhere else. After pondering for a while, Lu Feng had more or less figured it out. It should be because of the previous battle, when I transformed into the demonic emperor and used all my strength to shatter the illusory world. The two grandmasters felt the explosion of power, so they saw the battle between me and the crown prince of the heavens. They should be the ones who saved me. Lu Feng still remembered that the final battlefield was in the endless void of the universe. The place he destroyed should also be in the void of the universe. If he hadn't been rescued, he would still be drifting in the universe. I just don't know how Lulu is. A trace of worry flashed through his eyes, but it quickly disappeared. This was because Lu Feng remembered. He remembered that at the final moment, when he had fallen into the abyss of despair, the Crown Prince of the Heavens had said that he would guarantee Lulu's safety. The Heavendao Crown Prince had demonstrated his power. He was a freak at the peak of the seventh step in the Tao of Monarchs. In this era, in this epoch, and in all epochs, he was a freak who stood at the peak. The words spoken by such an existence would never be easily revoked. He would definitely do his best to complete it. Moreover, Lu Feng also knew that although the Crown Prince of the Heavens had lost to him in the same realm, the Crown Prince of the Heavens' true power was not damaged in the slightest. Now that his true identity was exposed, he would become the true Crown Prince of the Heavens race. He was a supreme existence that no one dared to refute. Therefore, since he said that he wouldn't find trouble with Lulu, it must be like this. Feeling the soreness in his body, Lu Feng felt a little helpless but also a little excited. Lu Feng understood that this state would not disappear in a short time. After all, the aftereffects of the supreme technique were still too great. Moreover, this time, he had used it at his limit. It could be said that the use of such power had exceeded the burden of his body. In addition to the limit of the supreme technique, it would be impossible for him to recover in a short time. However, Lu Feng was incomparably excited. This was because he had already felt it. My cultivation level has finally reached the true Great Circle. Previously, in the Massacre Abyss, I relied on countless life and death experiences to finally draw in the chi of life and death, accumulating my power to the peak. If it was a breakthrough of a small realm, it would be enough. However, what I am about to break through is a true great realm. It is the true transformation from the golden body great demon to the purple gold great demon. Therefore, just those life and death experiences are not enough for me to successfully break through. Only in a true battle can I reach the realm of perfection. This time, if not for the bloody battle with the Crown Prince of the Heavens, I am afraid that it would be very, very difficult for me to reach the realm of perfection. With a slight smile, Lu Feng finally got up from the bed. He didn't like to sit here and wait passively. However, just as Lu Feng was about to get out of bed, the simple and unadorned door was pushed open. Fu! Fudu big brother! You are awake! Seeing that Lu Feng was awake, Lulu's face revealed a trace of pleasant surprise. Today, it has been a full 3 days since Lu Feng fell into a coma. After the previous battle, Lulu was brought here by the two great alchemy masters. However, Lulu was knocked out by the powerful power, so she woke up not long after returning. After she woke up, she told everyone everything. After hearing what happened, the two great alchemy masters were speechless. After that, they arranged for Lu Feng to stay in a room. For the after-effects of the supreme technique, these people didn't have much to do. After all, this was a kind of extreme burning of power. Unless it was the legendary supreme immortal pill of the immortal devil era, there was probably no way to recover. In the two alchemy masters' senses, Lu Feng would have to wait at least 7 days before waking up. However, Lulu seemed to be worried about Lu Feng. After waking up, she often ran to Lu Feng's side. Therefore, not long after Lu Feng woke up, he saw Lulu. Lu Feng could feel Lulu's emotions. Lu Feng's heart was filled with endless pity for this cousin of his. He knew that although Lulu's current state was mainly because of the Tian Dao clan, if the Lu family hadn't been so ruthless, Lulu wouldn't have suffered so much. Therefore, as someone with the bloodline of the Lu family, he also had a responsibility. Smiling, He reached out and gently patted Lulu's head. Lu Feng said, "Lulu, remember, in the future, call me cousin. Call me cousin Lu Feng. Got it?" Hearing this, Lulu didn't reply. She only lowered her head. After a long time, she finally raised her head and looked at Lu Feng. "But grandfather said that I'm not a member of the Lu family. Lulu is not a member of the Lu clan. Before the Lu clan recognizes her, Lulu cannot become a member of the Lu clan." Lulu was already 16 years old. After experiencing so much, she naturally knew a lot more than others. She knew that the Lu family was the #1 family in the world. It was very difficult to be recognized by the Lu family. Back then, her grandfather, with his amazing aptitude, had also been expelled because he had violated the rules of the Lu family. She was just a useless mixed-blood psychic. In the Lu family there were too many people like her. She didn't have the qualifications to be recognized by the Lu family. Lu Feng shook his head gently. However, his gaze was fixed on a figure slowly walking in behind Lulu. "If I say that Lulu is my cousin, then Lulu is my cousin. Do you believe it?" Third Grandpa. It was an extremely young figure. Based on his appearance alone, he wasn't much older than Lu Feng. However, if one looked at his eyes, one wouldn't think so. His eyes were filled with endless vicissitudes of life. Such a pair of eyes would cause anyone who saw it to feel endless heartache. When he heard Lu Feng's greeting, the figure moved slightly. However, he soon calmed down completely. He looked at Lu Feng without saying anything. However, there was an extremely excited look in his eyes. After a long time, when this excitement slowly receded, he finally let out a slow sigh. And from this sigh, what Lu Feng heard was a strange kind of desolation, a strange kind of vicissitudes of life. "You called me Third Grandpa. Are you willing to admit that I am your third grandpa?" At this moment, Lulu had already left Lu Feng's side and stood by the young man's side. Lu Feng didn't hesitate. He smiled and nodded firmly. "You are my third grandpa. You are my third grandpa, Lu Xiaoran." This was something that no one could erase or change. Just like Lulu, who is my cousin, the blood of the Lu family flows in her body. Even a divine king would not be able to change all of this. There was a hint of gratification in his eyes. "You are Lu Feng, right? I heard from Senior Su Ling that since you call me Third Grandpa, I will call you Xiaofeng." Lu Feng nodded gently. He could already feel the aura of a bloodline connection from the body in front of him. Although this feeling wasn't very strong, it was real. Lu Feng understood that this young figure was definitely his third grandpa. He was the peerless genius of the Lu family 100 years ago, the emperor of killing, Lu Xiaoran. "Xiaofeng, you should understand the mistake your third grandpa made. This was a family rule. It was a helpless decision. Although your third grandpa has been expelled from the Lu family, your third grandpa doesn't hate the family." Lu Feng was speechless. He could sense the rich emotions in Lu Xiaoran's voice. There was longing, yearning, excitement, and sorrow. However, there was no resentment among all of this. As a cultivator who had entered the Tao, Lu Feng could absolutely tell that Lu Xiaoran didn't hate the Lu family at all. However, your third grandpa doesn't regret it. If he had to go through this again, he would still make the same choice. Lu Xiaoran's eyes were filled with determination. Lu Xiaoran had never regretted his decision. His love for Lu Xiaoran had never wavered in the slightest. However, when he shifted his gaze to Lulu, a trace of pity and guilt appeared in his eyes. "But all of this is too unfair to Lulu." Lu Feng nodded his head gently. Indeed, all of this was really unfair to Lulu. She should have been a happy and carefree little princess. However, she had gone through so much and endured so much pain that didn't belong to her. This was really unfair. Lu Xiaoran looked at Lu Feng with a hint of pleading in his eyes. "Xiaofeng, I know you are a direct descendant of the Lu family. Your third grandpa doesn't ask for anything else. I just hope that you can bring Lulu back to the Lu family. Your third grandpa doesn't expect the family to accept Lulu. However, I hope that you can help Lulu find a peaceful and safe environment where she can grow up happily and forget those sorrowful things. Lu Xiaoran already understood that as long as Lulu was still in the foreign battlefield, there would be no safety to speak of. Even if she became the disciple of a void spirit grandmaster, the result would still be the same. Therefore, when he saw Lu Feng, he finally grasped a glimmer of hope. He could sense that Lu Feng was a direct descendant of the Lu family. This was the feeling between people of the same bloodline. Therefore, he hoped that Lu Feng would take Lulu away for his sake and send her back to the Lu family so that she could grow up without any worries in the future. When he heard this, Lu Feng hesitated and fell silent. He didn't answer, but Lulu, who was beside Lu Xiaoran, spoke up anxiously. Grandpa, Lulu doesn't want to leave you. Lulu wants to stay here with you and Master. Lulu really doesn't want to leave. Chapter 365. Although Lu Feng was her cousin and Lulu liked to be with him, Lu Feng was still a little lacking compared to her grandfather and master. Lu Xiaoran did not say anything. He just smiled and stroked Lulu's head. His eyes were filled with doting love. If Lu Feng agreed, he would let Lulu leave no matter what, as this place was really too dangerous. It had been more than 50 years since he had left the Lu family. During these 50 years, Lu Xiaoran had deeply understood the meaning of being a peak overlord race. This meant that even in the weakest places of those races, there were still terrifying existences that had endless influence. Their power was frightening and irresistible. If one wanted to fight against a pinnacle race, then in the universe, only the ultimate existence that transcended everything could do. Only the supreme godly king could do it. Even the quasi-life and death quasi-monarch would not be enough. Lu Feng smiled when he saw the expectant look on Lu Xiaoran's face and Lulu's sorrowful expression. He gently shook his head. His expression was one of calmness. Lu Xiaoran's eyes dimmed slightly when he saw this. Xiaofeng, this is your third grandfather's wish. Since it's not possible, I won't blame you. Lu Xiaoran was Lu Feng's grandfather and a direct descendant of the Lu family, so he understood the authority of the direct line of descent. Naturally, he also understood how difficult his request was. If Lulu didn't have such an identity, she would just be a simple alien. Or if she was a direct descendant, Lu Feng could easily bring her to live on Human King Planet. However, Lulu was different. Her identity involved too many things. She was considered an abandoned descendant of the Lu family. How could such a person be accepted by the Lu family? Lu Feng shook his head when he saw Lu Xiaoran's disappointed expression. In the end, he looked at Lu Xiaoran calmly and said slowly, "Third grandfather, if you want the Lu family to acknowledge your identity, what conditions do you have to meet?" Lu Xiaoran glanced at Lu Feng helplessly. "Returning to the Lu family is too difficult. Although I am a genius, once the Lu family's direct line of descent awakens, any outstanding person will become a genius. The Lu family does not lack people like me. If I want the family to acknowledge me again, I need the family head and the elders to do so." He did not say anything else, as the difficulty of this task was already very clear. Getting the family head and the elders to acknowledge him would undoubtedly be extremely difficult. The patriarch of the Lu clan had a status that was so noble that it was boundless. He was the most respected existence in the world, second only to the divine king. The Lu family's family head was comparable to the emperors, kings, chiefs and other peak existences of the various dominant races. Even the current president of the human race was only on par with the Lu family's family head. It was obvious how powerful the Lu family's family head was. Back then, he was the one who had decided to expel Lu Xiaoran. Therefore, it would be even more difficult to change his mind and accept Lu Xiaoran again. The elders, on the other hand, were slightly easier to deal with. After all, once the family head made a decision, the elders rarely objected to it. Even if they objected, the minority had to obey the majority. Lu Feng analyzed for a while, and a smile gradually appeared on his face. He nodded slightly and looked at Lu Xiaoran quietly as he spoke in an unusually solemn tone. Third grandfather, you have been away from the Lu family for too long, so let's go home. Lu Xiaoran stared at Lu Feng in a daze. His mind was buzzing. His rationality told him that this was just a casual remark. After all, the person standing in front of him was not the Lu family's family head, but a direct descendant of the Lu family. However, when he heard the words "let's go home," his heart couldn't help but tremble. Lu Xiaoran was overflowing with talent and talent. He was also an unparalleled genius of his generation. When he left the Lu family, he had already reached the level of a true god. After going through countless trials and tribulations over the years, he had already stepped into the level of a King Realm Almighty. However, when this King Realm Almighty heard Lu Feng say, "Let's go home," he couldn't help but feel emotional. His eyes actually became moist. "Let's go home. I want to go home too." Her arms trembled slightly. A sorrowful expression appeared on Lulu's face. She had been with Lu Xiaoran since she was a child, so she knew how much Lu Xiaoran loved the Lu family. It was a blood relationship that couldn't be severed. "Grandfather, there will always be a chance. There will definitely be a chance." If he wanted a chance, the simplest way was to make a huge contribution to the Lu family. Given the current strength and influence of the human King Lu family, he would be of no help at all. The other way was to become strong enough. Perhaps this path was where his hope lay. It was also one of Lu Xiaoran's final goals in this life. "One day, I will become so strong that the Lu family will acknowledge me. I will become so strong that the Lu family will be willing to accept me again." Lu Feng nodded gently. If Lu Xiaoran was really strong enough, then perhaps the Lu family would make an exception and allow him to return. However, this was really very difficult. The strength that the Lu family had displayed was enough to make billions of other races tremble in fear. What it was hiding made people suspicious and fearful. Therefore, if he wanted to rely on his strength to make the Lu family acknowledge him, it would be really, really difficult. However, Lu Feng wouldn't say this out loud. There was no need to. Lu Feng glanced at Lu Xiaoran with a relaxed smile and said slowly, "Third grandfather, you should go home." Lu Feng said this again. This time, he said it so solemnly that it made people unconsciously want to believe him. Lu Xiaoran, who had already calmed down from his excitement, looked at Lu Feng in confusion. Without hesitation, Lu Feng said, "Third grandfather, you might not know this. I am the current young master of the Lu family." A sharp glint flashed across Lu Xiaoran's eyes. Young master? What a respectable title. The title of young master of the Lu family wasn't something that could be obtained so easily. Since the current young master of the Lu family, there had only been two young masters. That would be the former young master Lu Tao and this Lu Feng in front of him. "I am the young master. The God-slayer is the eldest young master. The God-slayer, Lu Tao, is my father." Lu Feng ignored Lu Xiaoran's shocked expression and continued, "Third grandfather, perhaps you have been hiding for too long and don't know of my existence. I am Lu Feng, the young master of the Lu family. However, my authority is equivalent to that of the Lu family's young master." Lu Feng's words were full of confidence. Now that he had broken into the 7th-level peak of the sovereign realm, with such combat strength and such monstrous talent, even the Lu clan would have to take him seriously. Moreover, with the supreme bloodline of the Lu family, it could be said that Lu Feng had already mastered the 4 supreme powers. Mastering 2 could make him a supreme king, an existence at the peak of the 7th stage of the sovereign realm. As for someone like Lu Feng, who had mastered 4 types of supreme powers. He had almost reached the peak of the sovereign realm. He had already pulled away from those monstrous geniuses at the peak of the 7th stage of the sovereign realm. Third grandfather, it's not that I, Lu Feng, am arrogant. It's because I have the right to be arrogant. I can tell you, there are billions of young geniuses in the universe. I, Lu Feng, am the strongest supreme king. I, Lu Feng, am the king. Among those of the same level, no matter if they are at the 6th or 7th stage of the sovereign realm, they all have to bow down to me. They will all be defeated by me, Lu Feng. I, Lu Feng, am invincible among those of the same level. His voice seemed calm, but it carried Lu Feng's invincible aura. Hearing this, an indescribable aura suddenly appeared on Lu Xiaoran's body. It was a kind of aura that penetrated deep into people's hearts. It made people tremble, and it was an indescribable sense of majesty. That was the majesty of a king. Under the majesty of a king, any head would have to submit and tremble. But this was nothing to Lu Fenglai. He was a person who had entered the Tao, and he was not afraid of anything. He had the strongest sovereign realm bloodline, and he was not afraid of anything. He had the supreme great demon, and he was not afraid of anything. He was the king, Lu Feng, and he was even less afraid of anything. Therefore, in the face of this terrifying will, Lu Feng quietly stood there. His eyes were unusually bright, but he did not take a single step back from start to finish. He had always been in the same place, and he never moved. Looking at Lu Feng, Lu Xiaoran gradually smiled and laughed loudly. Lu Xiaoran laughed crazily, sadly, helplessly, happily, and excitedly. Gradually, Lu Feng saw it. He saw tears slowly flowing down Lu Xiaoran's cheeks. Good, good, good. This is great, really, really great. He never thought that Lu Feng would be a monstrous sovereign realm genius, a peak 7th stage monstrous sovereign realm genius. The 7th stage symbolized the divine king. In the past, Lu Tao had dominated the world, and in the final battle, he finally broke the shackles and comprehended the god-slaying power. Relying on the god-slaying power and the power of his bloodline, these 2 supreme powers, he entered the peak 7th stage of the sovereign realm. But his path to becoming the divine king had been broken in the end. He still had the chance to enter the divine king's domain, but he had already lost the chance to do so. But the young man in front of him was different. He was a true monstrous sovereign realm genius. As long as he didn't die, he would become the supreme divine king and glory of the universe in the future. The Lu family couldn't let the situation of the past happen again. They absolutely wouldn't let Lu Feng fall into the same situation as Lu Tao. Although the Lu family's combat strength was unparalleled, and they had the strength and foundation of any peak overlord race, the divine king had never been born in the Lu family. This was absolutely unacceptable to the Lu family. Therefore, Lu Feng, who would definitely be able to step into the divine king's domain, would have an unparalleled status in the Lu family. Lu Xiaoran understood that not only would Lu Feng have the same authority as the head of the Lu family, but he would also have the supreme authority to command the elders when he matured. He would become the most special person in the Lu family. In the future, when Lu Feng became the supreme divine king, he would be the first person in the history of the Lu family, excluding the human monarchs. If Lu Feng asked him to go home, then all of this would mean nothing. Chapter 366. Tears rolled down his cheeks. A mighty figure in the king realm was crying like a child. How ironic was that? However, when Lu Feng saw this, he did not have any intention of mocking him. All he felt was a strong bitterness and a faint sense of desolation. After a long time, when his tears gradually dried up, Lu Xiaoran finally calmed down. He looked at Lu Feng quietly, his eyes filled with endless emotions. Lu Xiaoran had never thought that he would one day return to the Lu family. He had looked forward to the day when he was strong enough to return. However, he also understood that that day was too far away, so far that it was almost impossible to achieve. But things were different now, because he knew that his dream, one of the dreams he had pursued in this life, had finally come true. This made him forget everything, and he even began to cry like a child. Lu Xiaoran, who had returned to normal, looked at Lu Feng with a complicated expression. After a long time, he sighed deeply and said, "Xiaofeng, third grandfather is really grateful to you this time." Lu Feng smiled and shook his head gently. He knew that this was the Lu family's mistake. There was really no need to thank them. However, Xiaofeng, third grandfather cannot leave this time. Your third madam, she's currently in a special situation. Third grandfather's original body is still protecting her. Therefore, third grandfather cannot leave. However, it won't be long before she recovers. At that time, third grandfather will return to the Lu family and go home. When he said the words, "go home," Lu Xiaoran's eyes flashed with a strange excitement. However, this expression only lasted for a moment before disappearing. Lu Feng did not know what was going on, but since Lu Xiaoran had said so, he could not force it. After thinking for a moment, Lu Feng said, "Third grandfather, let Lulu stay by your side for the time being. She should not be in any danger. After my battle with the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao, he promised me that he would not cause trouble for Lulu. I think that with his status, since he has already spoken, there shouldn't be anything else." Lu Xiaoran had a strange look on his face, but a moment later, he seemed to have thought of something, and a strange light appeared in his eyes. He nodded gently. "I didn't expect Qing Yun to be such an epic-level genius. The battle between you and him should have started a battle between kings, right? Since that was the case, his identity was completely exposed. Other than the master of the heavenly law, very few people in the heavenly law clan can compare to him." He agreed. Lulu should not be in any danger. Lulu's biggest threat was the Tiandao race. Since the Tiandao race had already agreed, there wouldn't be any more danger. Seeing how silent Lu Feng was, Lu Xiaoran seemed to have thought of something. He asked, "Xiaofeng, are you not planning to go back?" Lu Feng nodded gently. Now that he had reached the most perfect state, he only needed one more battle of life and death, and one more extreme clash, then he would be able to shatter everything and enter a new realm. When he entered the purple-gold Great Demon Realm, he would be even crazier and more extreme. Although he might not be able to shatter everything and enter the forbidden realm of the Emperor's realm, he was confident that in the battle between kings, he would be truly invincible against opponents of the same level. The four supreme powers, in addition to his incomparably terrifying physical body and martial Tao incarnation. Even without the human king scripture, Lu Feng would still be invincible against everyone of the same level. "Third grandpa, I came here for some special reasons. However, since I'm here, I won't go back so easily. I can feel that the Outland battlefield is the most suitable place for me. Here, I can accept life and death experiences, and I can meet true extreme opponents. I've wasted far too much time in the past. Compared to them, I might be invincible against those of the same level, or even those of a higher level. I might be able to fight or even suppress them. However, what about beyond that? For example, the Tiandao Crown Prince, Wang Qingyun. His true strength is that of a perfect stage martial artist. As long as he recovers his full combat strength, even a terrifying fourth-grade demigod won't be his match. If I meet such a Tiandao Crown Prince, I'll be completely suppressed in an instant. Therefore, the most important thing for me now is to increase my strength. I have to increase my realm. Only then can I truly fight against them, and only then can I truly dominate the path of the Emperor's realm, and break through to the Emperor's realm in the future." Ever since Lu Feng sensed his own nobility, he completely understood. His future goal wasn't to become the divine king. It was just that becoming a supreme divine king was no longer his goal. Even becoming the epic overlord was no longer Lu Feng's true goal. This was because he knew that even becoming the epic overlord wasn't the limit of his goal. In his heart, the only person he wanted to surpass was himself, the ancestor of his bloodline, the human monarch, who was known as the greatest existence since ancient times. Therefore, Lu Feng had never defined those evildoers as his opponents from the beginning. Even the so-called invincible evildoers of the epic level, who had stepped into the peak of the 7th grade Emperor's realm, couldn't be compared to Lu Feng either. They were merely the whetstones for Lu Feng's supreme path. Lu Feng had always chosen to surpass himself. If he had an opponent, then that opponent would only be himself. Therefore, Lu Feng wanted to stay because he wanted to surpass himself. Lu Xiaoran could sense Lu Feng's invincible willpower and knew that Lu Feng had already made up his mind. In that case, Lu Xiaoran couldn't say anything else. He knew that if he allowed Lulu to follow Lu Feng, she would be in endless danger. She would be a threat that was even more terrifying than the Sky Dao race. After all, Lu Feng's existence was something that millions of races feared and wanted to kill. I can sense your determination. Xiaofeng, you should already understand. No matter what kind of genius or evildoer you are, you will eventually have to step out and face everything independently. If you can't pass this hurdle, then even if you are an evildoer with amazing talent, you will ultimately achieve nothing. You will be bound by those huge thresholds and will never be able to advance. Therefore, Third Grandfather supports you. Lu Feng smiled faintly and nodded his head heavily. He knew that Lu Xiaoran was right. No matter what kind of genius one was, they would ultimately have to face everything independently and experience the test of life and death. Back then, Lu Tao had been hailed as the Lu family's only hope for the divine king after destroying the human monarch. He had been a peerless existence that the Lu family had nurtured with all their might. However, when he had reached a certain level, he had still been completely released and allowed to undergo the trial of life and death. The Lu family hadn't even taken any protective measures and had allowed Lu Tao to roam the universe alone. It could be said that Lu Tao's life and death had almost no connection to the Lu family at the time. In fact, when a peerless existence that a family had nurtured with all their might reached a certain level, all the major races and family factions would completely release them and allow them to grow amidst slaughter and bloody battles and slowly find their own path. Although it was dangerous and even destroyed all their hopes and efforts in a single day, there was nothing that could be done about this decision. All the races and factions understood that only geniuses who had truly grown on the edge of life and death would be able to break those terrifying barriers and become truly invincible overlords. Therefore, every genius had to experience these trials that could be called life and death. Lu Feng was the same. Lu Xiaoran naturally understood this point. However, he couldn't imagine that the current Lu Feng was only a peak evolution stage martialist. At this level, he should still be under the protection of his family and diligently improving his cultivation. However, Xiaofeng, your current strength is still a little too weak. If possible, it would be best for you to become a demigod before appearing. A demigod-level genius, even if he was the Emperor of Massacre at the peak of the 5th level, could be considered an invincible existence below the level of a god. With such strength, it was already considered possible for him to create a universe on his own. Existences above the level of a god rarely appeared. Furthermore, after becoming a demigod, even if he was only at the 1st level, he could still enter the realm of power deification. Geniuses with divine power could use many real secret treasures to escape most dangers. After becoming a god, you can use many treasures. When the time comes, you can also be considered to have escaped the awkwardness of those guardian crystals. Lu Feng didn't agree. He only shook his head gently. His smile was still as bright as ever, because Lu Feng had already determined everything. Indeed, his strength was still insufficient for the time being. Even if he was exceptionally talented, it couldn't change the fact that his strength was currently low. However, this couldn't change Lu Feng's mind. Since he had already set foot and started, and even participated in the first battle of the kings, it was impossible for him to retreat. This wasn't Lu Feng's style, and it wasn't the way an emperor would do things. Third grandfather, although it would be safer that way, I'm already here. There's no need for me to return. Here, I can improve faster and better. Compared to growing up under the protection of my family, this environment is more suitable for me. What he cultivated was the great devil true body and the primordial scripture, these two supreme technique. The Origin Sutra didn't need to be said. It relied completely on comprehension and the accumulation of time. This kind of cultivation method was something that Lu Feng could try in any place. However, to Lu Feng, the Origin Sutra was always a supplementary power. The only thing that was of great help to him was the strange supreme power that was produced in Shen Yuan's Sea of Consciousness. Apart from that, the Origin Sutra wasn't very helpful to Lu Feng at the moment. Lu Feng had entrusted everything to his path as a martialist. The path of a martialist relied on the great demon true body. However, cultivating the great demon true body wasn't something that could be done simply through cultivation. Without the baptism of blood, the sharpening of killing, the test of depravity, and the confrontation of life and death, he simply couldn't continue cultivating. Therefore, other heaven-defying geniuses would only appear when they reached the demigod realm. However, Lu Feng was always in such a state of cultivation. This was even more of a reason why he couldn't go back. However, it was a pity that he couldn't tell Lu Xiaoran about this. Upon seeing Lu Feng's resolute expression, Lu Xiaoran didn't say anything else. After a while, he seemed to have thought of something. Then, he tore open the void and took out an item that looked like a crystal from the space's exclusive realm. The moment he saw this item, Lu Feng understood. He was already very familiar with this crystal. Third grandfather, this is... Chapter 367. Lu Xiaoran smiled faintly as he looked at Lu Feng. Xiaofeng, I believe that your family's elders must have bestowed you with many guardian crystals. However, once you're here, those guardian crystals have lost their most fundamental function, which is to summon the power of the family's almighty. However, the guardian crystal I gave you is different. I've been in the foreign battlefields for the past 50 years. Based on my familiarity with the battlefields, I can already condense guardian crystals. I condensed a total of 3 crystals. I gave one to Lulu and the other one was given to me. Lu Xiaoran paused for a moment, but he didn't continue. That's the last piece. This is it. Xiaofeng, take this guardian crystal with you. If you encounter any danger, Third Grandpa will quickly descend. Although there are countless powerhouses in the Outerverse battlefield, Third Grandpa isn't an ordinary person either. Therefore, it should be able to protect you most of the time. Lu Feng nodded gently. The Outerverse battlefield was incomparably huge, and it was several times larger than the Human Federation's territory. Perhaps the number of powerhouses in the foreign battlefields was much greater than that of the other races, but it was still quite impossible to casually encounter a powerhouse in such a vast world. With Lu Xiaoran's Almighty King realm strength protecting Lu Feng, as long as Lu Feng didn't provoke the truly terrifying existences, such as a domain lord, there shouldn't be any problems. In that case, Third Grandpa, I won't decline. Lu Feng also needed this kind of protection. Although he had the help of the Sacred Clan's secret techniques, it was hard to guarantee that he wouldn't encounter any unlucky accidents. At that time, with Lu Xiaoran's help, Lu Feng could at least guarantee his own safety. Then, Xiaofeng, you should rest for the next few days. Once you've fully recovered, Third Grandpa's avatar will accompany you to the medicine deity Dominion. Lu Feng nodded gently. He had to go to the medicine deity Dominion, and so did Lulu. Therefore, there was nothing special about going with Lu Xiaoran. Lu Xiaoran left the room with Lulu, leaving Lu Feng alone to recuperate. However, Lu Feng, who was in deep meditation, was unaware of the upheaval outside. Many geniuses were affected by the start of the Battle of the Kings. Although they didn't know which two monstrous geniuses had started the Battle of the Kings, all of them understood that the era of chaos had officially begun with the Battle of the Kings. One day after the start of the Battle of the Kings, the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince, who had returned to the Heavenly Tao race, completely revealed himself. He publicly admitted his identity as the monstrous talent of the New Age and explained the news of his defeat. Then, he announced that he would enter the endless abyss with the intention of comprehending the third supreme power, infinite power. This news caused many of the races to be abnormally terrified. This was because from the moment the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince made his domineering announcement, everything related to him had already been obtained by the spies of the various major races. The Rhombus Force was a supreme power that many people could guess. After all, it was the fundamental power of the Rhombus lineage that dominated the universe. Many people knew about it. However, the following statement made the geniuses and monstrous geniuses of billions of races tremble in fear. This was because in addition to the Rhombus Force, the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince actually possessed the bloodline power of the seven divine king of the Rhombus lineage. It could be said that he alone possessed the power of the seven divine king. Although the seven divine king weren't the overlords of the New Age, there were still three temporal supremes among them. Although the bloodline power of the seven divine king didn't reach the level of supreme power, it was already considered a quasi-supreme power. In addition to the Rhombus Force and the power of the seven divine king, the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince was rumored to possess the power of the Yellow Spring, which no one in this era had been able to comprehend. When this news came out, almost the entire universe was shocked. The power of the Yellow Springs was definitely the most powerful force that could make the universe tremble in fear. Among the supreme forces, it belonged to the pinnacle of peerless forces. The Heavenly Tao Crown Prince, who possessed two supreme powers and a quasi-supreme power, should have been among the peak seventh-order monstrous geniuses of the King realm during the War of the Kings. However, such a monstrous genius was still defeated. How terrifying would his opponent be? As the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince headed to the endless abyss under the protection of the Master of the Heavenly Tao, he finally faded out of everyone's sight. Following that, the Heavenly Tao clan's patriarch revealed the truth of the battle on the third day under the instructions of the Master of the Heavenly Tao. When the truth of the battle was revealed, the entire universe fell into an endless uproar. Is the news confirmed? Emperor Lu Feng didn't die? He had even mastered 4 types of supreme powers. He completely suppressed the Heavenly Tao Crown Prince, who was at the same cultivation level as him. Investigate, investigate, investigate. No matter what, we have to find Lu Feng's location. We have to kill him at all costs. Be careful not to expose the identity of our clan. Kill, kill. He has never experienced a war of the kings, but he already possesses 4 supreme powers. Even the former overlord of the 3 great realms was only at this level. Such a monstrous genius cannot be allowed to live. If given enough time, he might become another king realm expert. However, be careful. The war of the kings has already begun. The Treaty of the Era will be reinstated. At this time, no one can discover our existence. Otherwise, our clan will be in danger. Emperor Lu Feng, huh? Good, very good. I've been silent for so many years. It's time for me to wait. 4 supreme powers? So what if he had the 4 great supreme powers? Although supreme powers are important in the War of the Kings, they are not the only things that matter. This time, let me step on your bones and become the first step on my path to becoming a king realm expert. The Outland battlefield is really lively. I think those bastards should have gone there to challenge Lu Feng. Since that's the case, I can't stay idle. Ancestor, please let me go. Since Emperor Lu Feng dares to start the War of the Kings when he's still at his peak evolution stage, why can't I, who is already at the peak perfect stage, experience it? Various peak races, ancient races, secluded races and forces, as well as those mysterious existences, were finally awakened. Many monstrous geniuses had already given up their plans to continue cultivating to the perfect stage because of the War of the Kings. They all understood that in the era of the War of the Kings, falling behind by one step would mean being eliminated forever. Therefore, when the Crown Prince of the Heavenly Tao and Lu Feng started the War of the Kings, regardless of whether they were willing or not, they were forced to experience it. The commotion caused by the monstrous geniuses naturally caused a commotion among the various races. At this moment, invincible kings from the various peak overlords and first-rate races were awakened. They woke up from their ancient slumber and disappeared along with the aura of many monstrous geniuses. In the human race's Supreme Council, many King Realm existences gathered again at this moment. However, there were obviously many more people this time compared to the previous time. This time, not only the Federation government, the Federal University, and the Lu family participated in the War of the Kings, but also the Divine King clan, first-rate families, and second-rate families, all had their powerful ancestors who had awakened and participated in the War of the Kings. Even the BUCC, the Federation Bank, and many other peak forces of the human race also had powerhouses among them. Many terrifying almighty experts in the King realm sat quietly in their seats and didn't say a word. Although they were all King realm existences and were like ancestors in their respective forces, they enjoyed tributes and received countless praises. However, in this place they were nothing. They only participated in the War of the Kings to inform them, not to let them have a real discussion. Many existences were quietly looking at the center of the Supreme Council. They were waiting for the most honorable existences to make a decision. Gradually, 3 invincible figures were slowly born and walked out of the void. They broke through the chaos of time and space and crossed over from the other side of the endless mystery. These 3 existences were the most powerful existences in the King realm. They were all quasi-kings of life and death. However, among the King realm existences present, there were many quasi-kings of life and death. However, they could only listen from the sidelines. Only these 3 existences who walked out could make the decision. Although they were existences of the same level, the 3 of them had a status that they could never compare to. All of this was because the 3 of them were called the supreme beings of the other path. They were the Heavenly Lord King of the Lu family, the Radiant King of the Federation government, and the Heavenly Emperor Kong Ming of the Federal University. Looking at the 3 great existences in front of them, everyone sighed slightly. They knew that the 3 terrifying figures that had appeared were just the incarnations of the 3 great existences. They were all supreme beings of the other path. Once their true bodies descended, the entire Federation world would be completely destroyed in an instant. The supreme beings of the other path were the Divine King in this era that was full of the Divine King's curse. If it wasn't necessary, they would hide in the endless space-time laws and cultivate in silence. Even if only 3 incarnations had appeared, it was already an extremely important matter. The 3 incarnations that descended were no different from their true bodies. They glanced around and didn't say much. They just quietly looked at the many existences. After a long time, the Radiant King of the Federal University finally spoke. He said slowly, "I think you all know why the Supreme Council was convened this time." Many great existences of the King realm nodded gently. Everyone's gaze shifted slightly to the Supreme Heavenly Lord King of the other path of the Lu family and a King realm existence of the Mu family. Facing these people's gazes, the Heavenly Lord King only revealed a strange smile. It was different from a few months ago. Back then, he and the other ancestor of the Lu family had descended here to vent their anger. Because at that time, Lu Feng had been captured by the Divine King and completely disappeared. This time, it was because he already knew of Lu Feng's existence. Moreover, the news of the battlefield in the outer domain and the Tiandao race had already spread a few days ago. Lu Feng's terror had once again shocked the world. As for the way they looked at the King realm existences of the Mu family, they were completely envious. Before Lu Feng disappeared, the matter of him causing a scene in the Mu family for Mu Shiyan had already been completely spread along with Lu Feng's disappearance. Although Lu Feng had caused a scene in the Mu family, no one would really laugh at the Mu family. Because Mu Shiyan was also a member of the Mu family. Lu Feng had already acknowledged Mu Shiyan's identity. Many existences believed that the Lu family would absolutely respect Lu Feng's decision. Therefore, Mu Shiyan's identity could almost be confirmed. Lu Feng had already confirmed that she was a monstrous genius at the peak of the 7th rank of the King realm. Such an existence was destined to become an existence that could become a supreme god king. Therefore, Mu Shiyan's identity was almost equivalent to that of the Empress. And if Lu Feng could really fight to the end and become the supreme overlord, then Mu Shiyan would be one of the most noble existences in the entire universe. She would be the Empress. It could be said that as long as Mu Shiyan did not break off relations with the Mu family would even be comparable to any of the Divine King's clans in the future. Such a situation could be called shocking luck. How could many existences not be envious? Facing the gazes of many existences, the King realm expert of the Mu family did not say anything. However, anyone could see the strange look in his eyes. After a slight glance, the majesty of the radiant king caused many existences to gather again. This time, I've summoned all of you because the Emperor has awakened and made a strong recovery. He suppressed the monstrous heavenly king of the Tiandao race. Of course, that's within the same realm. And because of the battle between the Emperor and the Heavenly King, the Battle of the Kings has completely begun. I believe all of you are aware of the significance of this. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.